And I can see that the meeting is now recording. So I'll take the adherent. Councillor Allison, I can see that you're here. Also, Councillor Anderson is here, as is Councillor Bradley. Councillor Brown.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan is here. Councillor Chalmers is also here. I note that Councillor Carmichael is here. Councillor Carmichael, are you substituting for someone today? I'm not hearing anything from Councillor Carmichael.
No, Pauline, no, I'm observing.
That's lovely, thank you very much. Councillor Chalmers is here. Councillor Convery is also here. Councillor Cooper is here. Councillor Corbett is here, as is Councillor Craig, Councillor Devlin, Councillor Dorman, Councillor Fagan.
I'm here, Pauline.
Thank you. Councillor Faulkner's here. Councillor Hamilton.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Logan is here. Councillor Loudon.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe is here. Councillor McAdams.
I'm here, Pauline.
Councillor McCreary is here. Councillor McGuigan is here. Councillor Miller.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Nayland is here, as is Councillor Nelson, Councillor Ross, Councillor Shearer.
Here, Pauline.
Thank you. Councillor Wardlaw is here. Councillor Wilson.
I'm here, Pauline.
Thank you. And I can confirm that there are not a number of officers present also. So, Chair, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks very much, Pauline. Are there any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. We'll move on to item 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on 10th of February on pages 5 to 12. Does any colleague have any item to raise from those minutes?
Councillor Brown has raised his hand, Chair.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I wonder if I can come back on I know it's becoming a tedious repetition thing on my part on the issue of the recording of the council meetings and its publication. I see that there is on the website now a thing in red that says these things are being recorded and will be made available via a link, but there ain't any link for the meetings that have actually taken place and are up there as far as I can see. Can we have an update on what the position is with regard to that?
Yes, Paul, is that yourself or Geraldine?
Chair, can I I can respond to that.
Thank you, Geraldine.
Councillor Brown, there is the special executive meeting that was held in January is already on the YouTube channel, and there is a link to that from the council's website. The backlog of recordings up until last week are all with the company for subtitling, and we should be receiving them back, so they will all be on. The backlog will be on before the end of the month. There was just the contract, we negotiated the contract for the subtitling, and then we had to send all the information to the company, and that took several goes to get it to them just because of the size of the MP4 files that were being transferred, but they have them all. We had to do it in 3 batches because there were so many of them. So they're all with the company now, and they are being subtitled, and we should be starting to receive the ones from batch 1 next week, and they should be on, but the date to get them all back is the 24th of March.
The reason I was asking, Chair, with great respect, though, is that although Geraldine says there's a link on the website, I've been looking at the website. The link, to say the least, isn't obvious. It isn't connected to one of the meeting agendas or anything of that sort, I don't think. I don't want to hold up the meeting today about this, but you know, if we're going to actually spend a lot of money on this one and make it work, it's not terribly acceptable that there isn't actually a link to be identified by the public. The whole thing's a waste of time otherwise. So
Geraldine,
perhaps have some report back on it, maybe after the meeting or something.
Yes. Chair, can I ask, we're going to publicise, once we have all the recordings, we are going to put a link and do some publicity on the web page to alert the company to let the public to where it is. And we've actually been talking about setting up a specific YouTube channel for the live streaming. And as you know, the first live stream meeting will be Finance and Corporate on the 17th.
Yeah.
So we are working towards that. Tom has put a message in the chat to say there is a link on the website.
Right, okay, well, I'll have a closer look, but it's an obscure link, if I'm not mistaken. It's not obvious to anybody looking at committees and things.
Well, I'm sure, Robert, as Geraldine says, if we're going to get, I mean, it is important that we get this done as quickly as possible. And I'm sure if we're going to get the publicity in place to make sure that people are aware of what we're doing, that's a step in the right direction. But I quite agree with Robert in the fact that we need to try and make sure this is highlighted as quickly and as efficiently as possible so that people do get a chance to have a look at these meetings. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Robert. Right, no other questions. I'll move this as a correct minute.
I'll second, Chair.
Thanks very much.
Councillor McAdams has her hand raised. Apologies.
Sorry, Councillor Monique.
No, that's okay, John. It was just to say that I think one of the things that's really important from an equalities point of view, and this has probably been flagged up with Geraldine, but if it hasn't, then I think it should be raised, and it's to make sure that none of our councillors are disadvantaged. So with how Teams is working just now, then Councillor Ferguson basically has got somebody pinned, and then basically for him to see with his interpreters. But it means it's very difficult for him, the way that Microsoft Teams is working, for him to be able to have the same advantage as the rest of us. So I think that that's something that we need to look at, and it also needs to be handled really sensitively. So if that meant that there was a delay in basically the recordings going out, which then meant that Grant wasn't disadvantaged, basically in his community, then I'm actually fine with it, there actually being a delay so that it can get done properly. So I would much prefer that Geraldine and whoever else is involved in this actually looks at that from an equalities point of view to make sure that we're doing everything correct as a council. If that means there's a delay, then I'm actually fine with that delay. We waited this length of time, another week's not going to make any difference. Anyway, thanks for letting me come in, John.
Thanks, Monique. I'm sure Geraldine will take that up. Okay. Move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the special meeting held on 24th of February on pages 13 to 14. Does any colleague have any comments to make on those minutes?
No hands raised, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. I would move the minutes as a correct record.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 4, which is the capital programme monitoring for period 11, and that's on pages 15 to 22. And I would ask Paul to give us a report on this, please.
Right, thanks, Chair. This capital monitoring paper takes us to the period to the 29th of January. What you can see in the paper at 4.1 is the figure of £80.648 million. So that's the level of budget that we're working to. At the top of the second page at section 4.3, it makes the point that included within that is a figure of just under £7.9 million as an estimate of the costs of COVID that are going to be met from the capital programme. This has been reported for a period of time across the year. A point is made at 4.4 that depending on the funding and the flexibility that were offered by government as we come to the end of the year, we may take a change in approach as to how those COVID costs are met. So the point that I'm making there is there might be a transfer of spend from the capital account to the revenue account in respect of that before we get to the end of the year. And what I would probably look to do is update you on that the next time I report to the Executive Committee. In terms of the resources position and the outturn, you can see that picked up at 4.5. And what we're looking at is an outturn of £65.7 million, and that's compared to a budget of just under 72. And that's after I've excluded those costs of COVID. And what the paper goes on to explain is at 4.9, in terms of how that's moved from what was reported to you the last time we met, is decreased by £1.3 million. So the amount that we think we're going to spend by the end of the year has come down by £1.3 million. And the reasons for that are picked up in section 4.10, where it goes through the specific amounts of money and the projects that relate to that further decrease of £1.3 million. Now, there is a point I would make, particularly as we get to the end of the year, and it's summarised in Appendix 3 to the paper. And what Appendix 3 does is goes through these projects that have got an underspend in the year and just lists when they're going to be completed. Because especially this year, because of a number of the delays in relation to the pandemic, there is money that's going to be spent at the start and in the first part of next year instead of this year. So what that appendix does, and that's on page 21 of your papers, is goes through the projects that have got a delay and when they are going to complete by. So the paper then goes on to look at the housing programme, and it makes the point that we've got this revised capital programme for housing of £48.172 million, and at present we are looking to spend that amount of money, and at 5.3 and 5.4 we cover the amount of money that's been spent to date by housing. So what we're looking for, Chair, in terms of the recommendations within the report, is noting of the position on those programmes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Does any colleague have any questions for Paul?
Councillor Cooper, Chair.
Thank you very much. Margaret?
Paul, turning to page 21, can you give me a wee bit more detail on the purchase of cemetery provision? Is there a project in mind for that?
From memory, Councillor Cooper, right? Obviously, it relates to specific blocks of land adjacent, I think, to existing cemeteries. I can go and get records in terms of what it is that we're looking to do and which stage this is progressing. The only maybe alternative I can offer is if Michael knows this, because it's his resource who are obviously progressing that spend. I don't know if Michael will have that information to hand either, though.
Chair, Michael McGlynn's looking to come in at the moment.
Michael?
Yeah, sure. Chair, I can give two examples. Is that we are looking to purchase land within Douglas Village. There's some technical and legal issues that we have to resolve with the landowner, but that's progressing. But that has resulted in a delay in concluding the sale and therefore the expenditure. The other site, by way of example, Councillor Cooper will maybe recall this, is that we've been trying to find a site in and around the Straven area for some time, and it's causing some issues, and as a result we've been unable to acquire land and therefore make the spend. So that's just by two examples of how the spend hasn't been made. But as Paul says, we're hoping to make progress, and that's why we're looking to roll the funds over. So hopefully that will give some clarification.
Margaret?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions of Paul?
No further hands, Chair.
Thank you very much. I would move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Move on to item 5, which is the revenue budget monitoring for period 11 on pages 23 to 38, and would ask Paul to give us an update on this, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair. It's a pretty lengthy report, right? But what I'll try and do is just give you an update on the position to the one that we reported to the last committee. And if you remember, to the last committee, I brought the probable outturn position. So this is when we make as accurate a forecast as we can, especially this year, to what we think the position is going to be at the end of the year. So what I'm going to take you to, first of all, is section 5.5. And that has the table that I presented the last time, which shows our estimated position to the end of the year. And I'm still, at this point in time, pitching that at an underspend position of just over £250,000. And you'll remember, as I say, you can see that at the bottom right-hand corner of the table. What we did to the last committee was to take you through the overall costs of COVID after various streams of funding have been received. We looked at the amount that was being recharged to HRA and to the capital programme, and we got to this figure of £4.6 million of a projected outturn overspend. And that was the picture that we've been reporting pretty much for the majority of this year. And then at the last committee, I talked you through the movements that were arising from the probable outturn to get to this position, which is just on the underspend side at £250,000. So that's still the position at this point. Another point I would just follow up on, especially after that capital paper, is covered at 4.3. And again, I'll make that point that as we come to the year end and we see the funding alternatives that are there in front of us, I may be asking to you, can we move that spend from the capital programme over into the revenue side, because it may give us more flexibility moving forward in terms of how we use funding that's been received for COVID. The third point I would make on the paper, if I can take you to section 6.6, and this is one that I think we do need to remind ourselves of, and that shouldn't be overlooked. There is a significant amount of money that I'm relying on coming to the council from what we call the mobilisation plan. So this is how costs of social care are being recouped from the government, and that's money that's actually coming to the council via the NHS. So again, you can see the figures in that section. There's a significant amount of money that we're relying on that is coming through, but they'll need to manage through to the end of the year. So that's a big chunk of spend that's been funded through that route. And the last thing that I would point to is section 6.7, which again is on that same page, on page 26, and it's just given an update in terms of additional amounts of funding related to COVID that have come through since the last meeting. So you can see them there, and there's a reference to the flexible funding, which is available for authorities that are in Tier 4 lockdown, and that's been received as well, and that takes us to the total amount of £30 million that's been received to date. So in terms of recommendations in the paper, Chair, you can see them picked out at 2.1. Around that position, the recommendation centre in terms of the underspend of £261,000 that we're projecting to the end of the year. And you can see as well the other positions there in terms of the up-to-date figure on the general revenue account as it stood at the end of January and the housing revenue account. So any questions, I'd be happy to take them, Chair.
Thanks very much, Paul. Does any colleague have a question for Paul?
Chair, I don't see any hands.
Thanks very much. I would move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can we move on to item 6, which is the additional funding from the Scottish Government, pages 39 to 42. And Paul, if you can again give us a report.
Okay, if you go to the appendix, the rear of the paper, you can see a list there of the amounts that have come through since the last time we brought this paper. And you can see the amounts totalling £10.2 million. All of that is 2020-21 money, and you can see probably that almost 90% of that is covered by 4 of those grants. Money for school meals that's come through. Money, you can see £3.48 million. Taxi, private hire, driver support. Obviously, that's grant money that we're getting that we're passing on to that group of people, so it doesn't benefit the council's position. Teachers' induction money, which is something that does come through every year, and money for education in terms of recruiting additional teachers, and that's £1.624 million. So again, what we're looking for under the recommendations is that revenue funding of £10.2 million, and there is a small amount of capital funding of £80,000 as well, which you can see at the foot of the page, coming through to social work resources. We're looking for noting of receipt of those amounts. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Does any colleague have any questions?
Chair, no hands raised.
Fine, I would move the recommendations.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. We now move on to items for decision. The first of those items is item 7, and it's the draft community wealth building strategy. And again, Paul, if you can give us a report on this, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So the main piece of content in this report is the draft community wealth building strategy, which, as you say, begins on page 47 of your papers. And you can see the document laid out there in full. So what the covering paper talks through is, I suppose it starts off with what the origins of community wealth building as an approach is, and the recognition that it's had. So 3.2 makes the point that it's been endorsed as an approach by the Scottish Government, and it also features as part of the programme for government, which was published in September last year and which got reported to the Executive Committee. COSLA has signalled its support for the principle of community wealth building, and building on these endorsements, building on that origin of this as an idea, what we've tried to do is to draft a community wealth building strategy for South Lanarkshire, and that's the document that's at the rear. Now, coming to the document itself, what you'll see is that it's framed around 5 pillars, right, of community wealth building. So they're based around spending, workforce, land and property, finance, and building a generative economy. And the strategy frames those things in the context of what this is, why we would do it. It puts in place, or it tries to put in place, steps around framing the governance for the council around community wealth building. And at the end, it looks at what success in this area would look like. So moving on to section 4.3, we pick up there how we've looked to put this together. So we have taken soundings from the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. We have tried to evaluate what our current practice is, and we've looked at approaches elsewhere and how we could put them into a South Lanarkshire context. So I'm sure there'll be discussion on the content of the document itself. The covering report finishes off with some of the practicalities around this. So the strategy lays out high-level aspirations, but what we do need to develop are action plans, probably framed around a sort of 3 to 5 year time period, which would support the delivery of the strategy. And at section 5.2, again, there's the point made about elected member input to this aspect of the strategy is going to be absolutely vital. 5.3 picks up on what we would do in terms of a reporting framework. We would have annual reports on progress. We would look to make sure that there's a dashboard in place of suitable indicators, and they start to be picked out in the draft strategy that you've got. We'd look to integrate this with the council's planning and reporting arrangements, including resource plans in the council plan. And also we'd look to try and frame a risk management approach around this as well. So as I say, you can see the draft strategy itself covering those areas that I've outlined beginning in page 47. And what the recommendations to the paper look for, Chair, as it says there, 2.1 is simply that the draft community wellbeing strategy is attached to the appendix be approved. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. I really welcome this document. I think the officers that have been involved, and I know it's high level at this time, but bringing this together has been no mean feat, and I think it augurs well for the future. But if any colleagues have got any questions of Paul, please make them known now.
Councillor Nelson, Chair, and Councillor Fagan.
Richard, and then Joe.
Thanks, John. I don't like those words that welcome the report, but I suppose I'll use them today and welcoming this report. And it's about getting the community involved. And the first thing I see in this strategy is a photograph of Larkcall and our place, our plan, and the work that was done by the people within Larkcall to produce a community plan. And I think the work that was done by involving the whole community shows what can come together when they work hard enough. My only thing is that these things need to be recognised. It's great that we have this strategy, which is wonderful, but these things need to be recognised and work needs to start happening. It's great getting all this done and it's all sitting there on paper, but it'd be wonderful to see things start happening, because if those things don't start happening, people lose interest. So, you know, yes, well, it's a great incentive and it's a great document. And suppose I'm trying to plug a wee bit more from Larkcall here, but you know, so we have done the work, but let's see the money starting to come through.
Thanks for your comments, Richard. Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I suppose I've got two very quick questions, not just around some of the detail of the report, and a few comments that I'd like to make. Firstly, in relation to the report, I'm just wondering when, I appreciate this might not be nailed down just now, but when are we likely to be looking to see the action plan element of what you were talking about there, Paul, come forward? We will approve this today, I have every confidence, but so I'm just curious about that next stage. Also, 5.5 talks about I think quite welcome actually that if we approve this, we will then be engaging with our partners in community planning and social enterprise, etc. And I think leveraging in some of these other organisations is actually quite important to how we make it work and how it succeeds. So I'm just wondering if I've had any sort of early feedback from any of our partners on the strategy and the sort of the ambitions that we're seeking to pursue. And then my sort of comments on the generality of it, obviously I would associate myself with what was said previously. I think from the Labour Group's point of view, we're very pleased to see the draft strategy come forward, in particular to see the 5 pillars of community wealth building recognised within it. And I think we've been very keen that in what we put forward, I mean, it's been encouraging to hear that people like Neil McEnroy and Kless have actually had an input into the document. I think it's just really important from our point of view that we kind of stay true to the concept that we can see working, and that has been successful in other local authorities. And I would simply make the point that some of the other local authorities that have taken this on board and have actually been winning awards by pursuing it have done so with a budget that we can count in the sort of tens of millions. There are authorities down south that where local government is an altogether different animal. Actually, we're a local authority that across all our different budgets can be spending something in the region of £800 million. And I have to say that the capacity to put more of that into the community and to apply this kind of approach to that kind of spend, I think it has great potential. And I'll obviously sort of welcome and we'll be supporting the strategy today.
Paul, could you answer Joe's questions? But thanks for the comments, Joe.
Right, listen, I'll certainly begin to have a go. In terms of the action plans, work's begun on them already, right? But because I've got faith that in some format this is a strategy is going to be approved. So the officers who have been responsible for pulling together the strategy have already started to lay out what could go in an action plan around that. A key part of that, though, is going to be this discussion element, as you say, Councillor Fagan, with partners and with yourselves, right? Because this is where we get down to the nitty-gritty, even to refer back to Councillor Nelson's point a second ago of how you actually make this work, right? The action plans are what take this from being something on a bit of paper to something that's actually making a difference in our communities. Now, again, just pointing back to your second point around discussion and involvement from other key partners, right, and from the wider communities. Part of that's picked up on page 5 around the governance arrangements, and it starts to lay out the structure that would have right around the Community Wealth Building Commission. It suggests the council leader is the chair of that, and then it lists representatives. Now that draws from across the range of community planning partners, and obviously prior to referencing them in there, we've had conversations with them initially, and they're absolutely receptive, right, to being part of this. But the next stage is about taking that on and saying, look, we've had this, the council has bought into this in terms of the executive committee, we're at the stage where we're going to put together the action plans, and then we get their involvement and we get genuine buy-in and participation through that route. So at that point, when I've talked about the community planning partnership, I'll maybe defer because I can see that the chair of the community planning partnership has her hand raised. Leader?
Yep, I see that. Maureen, would you like to come in at that point?
It's just on exactly that point. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, the Community Planning Partnership has gone on. Unfortunately, it was delayed because of the election and the purdah period and everything, but we've got a development session in early May. around the place-based work, including community wealth building and the 20-minute neighbourhood. And I very much hope that this strategy, having been approved hopefully by the executive today, is then on the agenda for the community planning board itself. There's loads and loads of community wealth across those partners, obviously all those anchor organisations, the Health Board, University of West of Scotland, Fire and Police and our third sector are all on that board. So I think that's a good place to get that discussion taken forward a wee bit. And I know that the third sector and social enterprise sector have been champing at the bit for us to get to this point. So I'm really quite hopeful that we'll get lots of buy-in at very much community level and at the more strategic level. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Maureen, for these comments. Alec, I see Alex got his hand up as well.
Yeah, Chair, just concur with everything that Councillor Nelson said at the start. If this programme being successful will indeed bring a great deal of benefit to many communities. There is one item I'd maybe like to talk about on page 55 on the spending. A lot of what we are aiming to do is looking at businesses, etc., out with the council. Yeah, one of the issues I keep hearing from small business is how it is very difficult to get involved in the council's contracts because of the complexity and the way they're set up. Surely part of this programme should be looking at the council's procedures for being able to engage and offering these contracts in a format that small and medium-sized businesses can access far easier. But I don't see that mentioned in starting at page 55 under the spending category. Could that not be added if when we're perhaps at the action plan stages? Because I do think it is a big omission and something we should be doing. It's not just those out with the council we're needing to support, but the council itself and how we present these opportunities.
Thanks, Alec. Procurement will play a huge part in this, Alec. I think everybody's aware that's involved in this about the present situation with procurement and the boundaries that don't allow us to do everything we'd like to do as far as procurement is concerned. But I'll bring in someone else who can speak more on that, probably Michael or one of his team. Michael?
Well, Chair, sorry, it was Paul here. I was just going to come in first.
All right, okay, Paul.
I'll just apologise for that, Chair. I'll just pick up Councillor Allison's point, and I think then Michael can come in. I mean, one of the things Councillor Allison has covered in here, it talks about the Meet the Buyer event and the Meet the Real Buyer event that we've tried to run. That's on page 56, which goes through some of the detail about trying to put people in touch with the people who are procuring, who are letting contracts within the council, to make this as easy as possible for local businesses. You know, one of the issues that we have, for example, is getting people registered on the gateways and the sort of framework contracts that facilitate doing business with the council, and that can be a real problem. And that sort of brings me to my next point before I bring Michael in. We do need to get better at this, right? So there's no point in having a strategy that says actually everything we're doing at the moment is terrific. It's about focusing on the areas where we need to improve, and again, that's where your own involvement and the involvement of partners as well becomes important here, because we need to break down any barriers that might exist and facilitate local business getting in touch and getting an ability to get contracts that are offered by the council. So understand what you're saying. There has been work, as I say, done in the past, and that's picked up on that item. But I'll hand over to Michael now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Chair, as well. I think just two additional points to what Paul has added there. Members will recall back in September, the resource was given funding to bring in 4 business advisors who are now in place, albeit they're largely processing business support grants at this point in time. But that will give us a resource to actually work with local businesses, establish a kind of network, a partnership, and understanding of how the council actually works, I know that may sound slightly simple, but that basic relationship building between businesses and council officers is very, very important. So I'd like to think through that additional resource, we can start to make some inroads. But I'd also highlight in page 55 the reference to the supplier development programme, which is hosted by the council. Again, a very good team, but a very small team. It's only 4 officers at this point in time that covers the whole of Scotland. And they do a really good job within the resources that they've got to try and break down and guide businesses to get public sector contracts. But as ever, without sounding like a cliche, there's always more that can actually be done. But I would hope that through additional support through business advisors that we can start to make some inroads. But I think there is a role for community planning partners, bearing in mind that it is the police, the fire service and the health service who have got very large expenditures. And I think that they should also be a part of this journey, which I think everybody's agreeing with. So I'll just stop there, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Do we have any other questions from colleagues?
Councillor Shearer, Chair.
David.
Thanks, Chair. I was just to seek some reassurance, maybe not at the strategic level, but certainly at the locality level, when the local plans start to come forward, that there is a role for the local elected members to be involved and to try and maybe not shape it, but at least be part of the process, especially, God forbid, if anything goes wrong, the local elected members will be the first port of call. So I'd like to think that there is somewhere within that process a place for local elected members. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for comments, David. Any other colleague like to make a comment? Nope.
No further hands, Chair.
Thanks very much. I would move the recommendation.
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you very much. We move on to item 8, which is participatory budgeting, and it's on pages 67 to 76. And I would ask Paul again to give us an update on this.
Okay, thanks, Chair. The paper starts off by referring back to an executive committee report which had similar content in the appendices, and that came in June 2020. And the agreement of the committee then was that this would be deferred to a later date. We are operating to a timescale around putting in place participatory budgeting, and that's covered by the material that you can see in sections 2.3 and 2.4. And there was a letter that was received by COSLA leaders, and that was considered at the end of January. And what that outlined was a degree of flexibility around participatory budgeting following the pandemic. And the section that's there at the foot of that first page at 2.4 just outlines how this is going to be monitored over this year. There's going to be COSLA work with local authorities this month, to try and get a gauge on what is actually happening. And that will form the basis of a report to the Scottish Government, which is going to be done this spring. And what that's meant to do is to inform a benchmark against participatory budgeting activity that will be carried out, and progress will be reviewed at this point next year, March 2022. So that's where this currently stands. The paper then goes on to cover sort of 4 areas around participatory budgeting. Firstly, what the areas are that are proposed to be progressed through participatory budgeting within South Lanarkshire. So that's covered in section 3. We talk about how we're going to engage with the community in section 4. There's a reference to the participatory budgeting charter, which you may remember from previous briefings and elected and reports to members. That's covered in section 5. And then we cover the elected members' role in section 6. So in terms of those proposed participatory budgeting areas, they're covered in that appendix at the rear of the paper. And what you'll see there, it breaks it down resource by resource. It covers the area, gives an outline of what the proposal is, the sort of geographic basis upon which this would be covered, and gives an idea of who would be consulted and how. And attached to that as well, we've got a series of actions. So you can see that in Appendix 1. So the rest of the covering paper, so it's section 4, it talks about how we would engage with communities on these proposals. And that starts off by talking about the fact that work has been done by the council to try and improve community participation. So there's a reference there, and we've had it referred to already in the meeting today, to the neighbourhood planning approach. And it also talks in that covering section about the methods that would be used to engage with the community. And it picks up the fact that we've got those detailed on the basis of each expenditure area in the appendix. We're also picking up in that section the fact that we're mindful of the need to provide support to people who might be less likely in a community to participate in these types of activities. As I say, that's picked up at 4.6, and the role of the community engagement staff is gone through there. And at 4.7, we outline the range of methods that we'd use to try and capture as many opinions and voices as possible. Section 5, as I said earlier, picks up on the participatory budgeting charter and the background to that, what it does and who's behind it. And 5.3 picks up the principles that are there behind that. And what we would look to do is to try and align our approach with the aims and principles of that charter. Section 6 covers the role of elected members in this. And you can see those bullet points at 6.2 picking out those roles to make sure that the aims of this process are clearly understood, to make sure that resources are in place to do this properly, ensure the process is effective, engage with local people, and it says there to approve the decisions made by local people. And that carries on into the remainder of section 6, which talks about the area committees and the fact that the terms of reference of those were changed to include that participatory budgeting role. And that was work that was done across the tail end of 2019 and the start of 2020. And you can see that captured in sections 6.5 and 6.6. So going back to the recommendations at the start of the paper, it's looking for noting of the information that's contained in here, and that those participatory budgeting areas identified in the appendix are agreed. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Paul, for that report. Does any colleague have any questions for Paul? I see that Councillor Chalmers' hand is up.
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly, obviously, this is something we really want to be moving on with. It flows nicely from all the work we've been doing around community-led planning. Communities that have been through that work, Richard referred to Larkhall earlier, who've done some tremendous work around about community planning and are more than ready to engage with participatory budgeting. And similarly in my own area, Blantyre, where we're a wee bit behind what's happening in Larkhall, but, you know, again, similarly, really keen to engage in this. I think we've got a real opportunity here to further empower our communities. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Is it Robert next, I think?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. It's no secret that whilst I'm in favour of the general direction of travel, I'm a bit sceptical about some of the details of the participatory budgeting programme. You know, to take one example, if we look at the things under housing, which relate to environmental works and small-scale improvements and so forth, the talk is of consultation through local housing forums. Now, I don't know what it's like in other areas, but to be quite frank, the local housing forums in my area have for a considerable time been fairly much skeleton, you know, with a considerably more attendance by officers than there is by tenant representatives. And the reason for that really is the decline that I think we've all suffered in the in the sort of viability of tenant and residents groups in local areas. And I think that makes these things kind of quite difficult. What is the community? What are local groups? And so on and so forth. Now, there are some ways through this. We've talked about the service delivery options we're going to use for the things like the roads programme and so forth. And that's, I think, quite helpful. I'd like to make 2 or 3 suggestions I've made, which I've circulated around officers and around group leaders before. One is that in terms of the environmental and state improvements things, then quite frankly, I think that ought to include all residents in the relevant groups, whether they're SLC tenants or not. Now, I know that there are some limitations on, because of the rent spend and so forth, to do with that. But the reality is, if you're talking particularly about tenemental blocks, then these are often a mixture of council tenants, private tenants, and owner-occupiers. And it's unrealistic to talk in terms of you know, restricting the involvement in these things to tenants only, notwithstanding the financial implications that emerge from these things. I'm quite keen on the idea of trying to establish tenement block action groups, because it seems to me that that's a focus which is very, very precise, which you can actually identify. You've got things like front garden areas, you've got close painting, you've got bin shelters, you've got play areas, you've got flower plots, that sort of thing, where you've got some potential, I think, to make some precise movements on this with very close identification of the residents and with encouragement of local groups where this is possible to be taken forward. I also think that we can do things with the area committees through town hall meetings, through problem-solving groups and things of that kind, to kind of get a locality focus, as well as whatever occurs through locality planning on this particular matter. And finally, I think there needs to be a report back in an organised way on the PB work, specifically the area committees, where I think this should be tabled at each meeting, and also there needs to be some sort of maybe annual report at the executive committee as well. Now, I'm not thrilled to the amendment as such, but I would like to see some consideration given by office as to these suggestions, if the committee would be supportive of doing that. I think it does give a bit of flavour and meat to the worthwhile objectives of participatory budgeting, but against the background of some of the holes in the project, if I can put it that way, which I think need to be filled up with something more precise. Thanks very much, Chair.
Robert, is this relevant to the amendment you were going to put forward?
Yes, it is. I've basically detailed what was involved in that.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask at this point whether that amendment is comparable? If I could possibly bring in someone, Geraldine, if you can say whether that amendment was competent that Robert put forward.
Thank you, Chair. The amendment put forward, as it stands, there are particular areas of it that would not be competent, and that is mainly because the report and the areas specified are intended to be funded, the housing, from the HRA. And the HRA, as you know, can only apply, the funding can only apply to council tenants. It can't be spent wider than that. So any non-council tenants, the impact of that is not being costed, and it couldn't be funded from the HRA. It would need to come from another budget, or the tenants, the residents would have to be charged for it. So that is an issue, and that relates to items 1, items 2 and items 2 of the report, of the amendment.
Thanks very much, Geraldine. I'm not sure where that leaves you at this present time. Robert, can I take some other?
Yeah, sure. Let's come back.
Take some other discussions. We'll come back to you later on. Okay. Can you tell me who's next?
Councillor Convery next, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jerry.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a couple of observations to Paul. Paul, just when 4.6, support should be given to those sections of the community which are least likely to participate. And that's my big worry, because if we go to Appendix 1, page 72 to 75, there's 8 themes in that. And within the 8 themes, who should be contacted? And there's only 3, says the general public, because I wouldn't like to think that participatory budgeting would just be for vested interest groups. It should be, in my case, 12,000, so many hundred people in my ward. How do we communicate with the wider population? That's my concern. And it was just to see, Paul, if you can give us some clarity as to how we're going to achieve that going forward. Thank you.
Paul?
Okay, I mean, I can understand where Councillor Convery is coming from, and a criticism around areas of work like this that applied for a period of years has been that the only people you hear are the same old voices in these types of consultation, right? And that's a fair argument. The point I would have to make, and maybe just to give the other side of this, see, in terms of the community engagement work that the council has done, I think there has been a terrific amount of progress made in that respect. and I'll point to two areas. One's households and one's what you would describe as communities of interest. And these are picked up across that appendix. So see, in terms of the community engagement team, the level of engagement that they are getting now and the exercises that they're doing, and we would absolutely look to have an action plan to make sure that this expertise is incorporated in what we do with the participatory budgeting. They're getting, within their neighbourhood planning areas, 40% of households completing survey responses. That's actively engaged in these neighbourhood planning processes that they've got. And in terms of the all of the exercises that they've been directed to do with the community planning partnership across the past 2 years, they've been getting that level of engagement. And an example of that, in terms of the exercise done in Cambuslang East recently, they had 1,044 people completing a community survey. So there is traction in terms of getting a level of engagement for exercises like this. Communities of interest, this is another area that they're actively pursuing in terms of trying to get this engagement. They've done it successfully with the neighbourhood planning. We'd look to make sure that's incorporated within participatory budgeting. And by that, I mean things like through tenants associations, local community groups, carer centres. These have all been terrific routes to get engagement. And these are things that are actively being pursued. So I understand where the criticism's coming from, but I do think traction's been made. And I think we've got expertise that could be brought to bear, and this is an area of work. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Can I just, Chair, it wasn't a criticism, it was an observation. There's a big difference.
Thanks very much, Jerry. I hope you've got some information back from that. Can you tell me who is next?
Councillor Allison next, Chair.
Alec.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
You've muted yourself, Alec.
Did it itself. Cursor wasn't even over the icon. Where had I got to? Yeah, participatory budgeting is a positive thing, giving local communities a far greater say. It's not whether, it's how, and some of the things that Councillor Convery has come out with is exactly where I am as well. I am concerned about what parts of the budget, how do we decide what part is going to be part of the 1%. At this meeting we've got a list. Is there going to be a process in future years for going through that? I've already had comments made from local communities that it's not affecting them because very little of what we're putting into the PB is covered by them. Where then is the decision taken? Because there is a big difference between consultation and decision making. The area committees were given a scrutiny role, but it doesn't mention the decision-making process. We then need to evaluate the different contributions. Even within my own ward, there are large areas that would not have local community groups working. There is others where we are a significant number of them. How do we evaluate one small group in an area compared to a large number of groups in another? I think the process is what has held this up in the past, and although there have been some small steps forward, and we don't really have an option now, we need to start, and I hope not have too many bits to repair in the future. But we have not really got the answers to the questions we asked when we deferred the paper in full as to how we decide what's to be participatory budgeting, and how we evaluate all the different views that come in and where the responsibility lies. We need a lot more work to be done in these areas, but we do need to take it forward today.
Thanks very much, Alec. I don't know if you want to come in on that, Paul. I mean, quite a lot of what Alec is saying is correct, but you really need to agree to participatory budgeting before we can start to move in a lot of the fronts that Alec's talking about. Paul, do you have anything to say on that?
I suppose just to come in, certainly in the first couple of Councillor Allison's points, in terms of how you decide what's going to form part of participatory budgeting, it would be through this route, right? So what I'm doing is I'm bringing a paper to the executive committee to say these are the specific things that we're going to look to deal with through this route. I do have an eye on that government target as well, right? And that at some point we'll be asked to show what we're doing towards this. So if there were other areas, and I would imagine there would be, I'd imagine we would learn from experience. I will bring back a report, right, which updates the committee on how this has progressed, whether it's worked, whether it hasn't, what the experiences of the community have been, whether there are other areas which, for example, elected members identify and say that would be a good area to be picked up by participatory budgeting. But that decision would always be taken by yourselves through this route. In terms of the spending decisions, that's taken by the community, right? And that's the purpose of this. The scrutiny role sits behind that, right? And that's what was going through the Standards and Procedures Forum, and we carved out a role for elected members via the area committees. So hopefully that addresses the first couple of Councillor Allison's points, at least. And if I haven't addressed another, I'm sure he'll remind me. Thanks, Chair.
Are you okay with that at the moment, Alec? You're muted.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I think so. It didn't really address the issue as to how you identify the weight you put on the variation in consultation responses from large groups, small groups, different parts geographically. And it's that changing from consultation to decision making that is going to be key and isn't really addressed at all.
Right, Alec, we'll take that up later. Thanks very much. Can you tell me who's next?
Councillor Fagan is next, Chair.
Thank you very much. Joe.
Thanks, Chair. And I have to say, I would be suspicious of anyone who isn't a bit anxious about this balance between I think it was put to me earlier in the week, representative democracy and participative democracy, because we've got to get it right, and there are all sorts of reasons why we have to get it right, which not least protecting the sort of the interests of South Lanarkshire as a whole, and the interest in people's money and people's services, that ultimately that's what we're elected to do. So I thought what it might be useful to do is, I wouldn't expect Paul necessarily to respond to each of these points, but I think it would be useful just to highlight where our concerns are about the process. Ultimately, we will be approving the paper today, but I thought it would be helpful to just outline what I thought some of the concerns might be, and if any of them that Paul hasn't picked up yet, he'd like to respond to, to invite him to. Obviously, this point has been made about participation. I won't repeat that, but there is, I suppose, a concern about the balance between encouraging this community choices sort of framework and encouraging participation at the local level versus the fact that we have a duty to provide services on a statutory basis across the council, and we have standards that we're expected to deliver across the council. There's also, I suppose, concern not so much about, I mean, the term sort of vested interest was used by somebody else, but I think in particular it's about paid interests, or indeed paid officials, paid, and the extent to which they could dominate the process. And I think from listening to the debate and the points that have been made there, what I'm getting is a different perception of the process from people who have been through something like neighbourhood planning and people who have not. And I think that what this paper is doing is obviously rolling this out on a wider basis. So those were the sort of main tensions in the project. I won't repeat the other points that have been made. The other point I do want to make is just around the kind of sort of the evolution of some of the bodies that sit around this. So the kind of community-led process that was alluded to earlier. I know that that's sort of recently arrived in Camglen, that there would be a new partnership in Camglen. I think it would just be useful as we go forward to actually clarify who the other actors are that aren't the council, but might be, might be representative of could otherwise be taken to be representative of the community. Might be useful to do that. In terms of Robert Brown's amendment, apologies, I haven't had the time, having discussed that with my members this morning, I haven't had the time to come back to him. I think on the basis of today, we'll probably not be supporting the amendment, but I have to say some of the points that he's raised I would have some sympathy with. I think we do have to acknowledge the work that was done at the Standards Procedures Advisory Forum. I'm very keen that even if councillors are taking a step back from that particular side of the process, that we are still monitoring what's happening. And actually, we've had the discussion about what the role of area committees is in the past, and I think that is quite a sensible place for area committees to have a role. Obviously, the charter has been mentioned as well. I think to some extent we don't know yet how this is all going to fall into place. The appendix has set out the proposals that have been put forward. I suppose there is more assurance about the process than there was, a year ago. On that basis, sort of the Labour group would be supporting the paper, but with those reservations and with those sort of concerns put on the record, and hopefully we can work through those in the months ahead.
Thanks for those comments. I'm not going to ask Paul to go through everyone. As long as he takes those on board, I think that would be sufficient, Joe. Okay. Can I ask, I think it's Alan Falconer.
It is, Chair.
Alan?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one. Paul mentioned about 2,000 responses to his neighbourhood network consultation. It maybe be better using that format when they're doing the council budget, when we'd less than 0.5% of the 300,000 residents in South Lanarkshire responded. But that isn't my main point. I regularly attend the meeting for the participatory budget. And the last meeting was on Monday, which took 2 hours. Or last Thursday, contacted them, the officers, and asked for a copy of the applications. I was told that I couldn't get a copy of the applications, but there'll be a summary by the officers at the meeting on Monday. The officers duly did the summary, and there were some good projects in there. 2 or 3 projects for John Ogilvie, food service provision, leisure service provision, and tenant project for the tenants. So there was only £7,000 in the budget. Some of the projects total 3,000. The total came to about 19,000. So then the officer said, right, the voting will need to take place the 18th of March. So if you go away and you'll get notification to apply in a monkey thing or something, they said, to put your votes in. Somebody asked who's allowed to vote, MD 15 years and over. So John Ogilvie right away are sitting saying, well, wait, no, we've got X amount of thousand pupils. We can do this. And how that's fair. I think we need to look at the whole governance here. I mean, I'm all for participating, being an ex-community councillor in the area. And I did attend the meeting as a member of the Hill House community and also as a local councillor. I just think we need to look at the governance of that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yep, that's something that we'll need to look into, Alan. You leave that with us. We'll have a look at that, certainly. Okay.
Thank you.
I think it's more. Have you got your hand up, Maureen?
Yes,
Peter,
I had.
Sorry.
Chair, we've got Councillor Craig, then Councillor Chalmers.
Sorry, Peter.
Thanks, Chair. It's been a really useful debate on this subject today, and everyone's points that they've been making. I've been through a journey with this, and everyone's points that they're making, I've considered through that journey. Richard alluded to the fact that Larkhall has a very strong community team, and that's absolutely true. They were recently had some national recognition of the work that they've been doing. As this has progressed, I've become more and more certain that all the points that my colleagues have been making today will be answered in time. I know that within my own ward there's a very strong community. Other wards perhaps need that built up, and the community engagement team are part of that. Some of the things about the usual voices being heard and not the whole community. A lot of that's to do with the empowerment that we give our communities. A lot of this, people throughout my time have come tried to make a difference and left again because they haven't felt that empowerment. What this is about is giving that empowerment to people. And with that, and I've seen it in Larkhall, when you give people that empowerment, they want to take part. They want to be able to make those decisions. So although it's not up to us to dictate to our communities what they should do, I think as we progress down this road, everyone will start to see that communities get stronger. And as they get stronger, they'll be more bound, and they'll start to make the sort of decisions on a wider level that we all want to see. I know there doesn't seem to be any levers or strings or gears attached to the decision-making process as far as we the council are, but those start to appear as long as we trust our communities. And the chief element of this is just trusting our communities to do this and giving them that power. So I really look forward to this taking hold. I think they'll all be surprised about just the amount of difference this will make in our own wards. So very much for this. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Peter, for the comments. Maureen, and then I'll bring back in Robert, I think, after that. Maureen.
Thanks, Chair. Some of the comments that Peter's made I won't repeat, but totally supportive of. And my experience has been also at national level as the Council's representative on the COSLA Community Wellbeing Board. So hearing those fears and concerns across Scotland over the last three and a half years, when people have been taking this forward and then getting updates and some of these matters have been resolved and moved on. And those interests are really powerful. So I know that people have got concerns about some of our maybe more vociferous community groups, our organisations, community councils, and fears that that's the only voices perhaps we hear. But those groups are also finding this quite challenging because it's not just about those community organisations, it's about ordinary everyday members of the public. And we're bringing in, I think we've got the new console tool now, which has kind of been developed with COSLA and the Improvement Service to allow that engagement of individuals and local residents. So really, really hopeful. I think we'll work our way through these. Other councils have done the same. We've now got 17 community plans in place across South Lanarkshire, with 3 in progress and another half a dozen going to be worked on over the coming year. So we're really making progress. And I know Joe raised the point about the kind of community planning structures being, what we're trying to do is develop community participation with the community planning partnership. So those local structures are being developed with local people. And my understanding is that there'll be a presentation to each of the area committees to kind of ensure that people understand what that work's about, what's behind it, and then obviously reporting any progress as we go. So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Maureen. I think that was really, really helpful. Back to Robert. Robert, I'm not sure you've heard that several items, several issues with your amendment. Would it be fair to say I don't think it's going to be supported, but certainly would it be possible to ask relevant officers to look at the other comments made in your amendment and see if we can clarify some of these points going forward? Would that be acceptable?
That's very helpful, Chair. I mean, I wasn't, although I phrased it as an amendment, it wasn't really what I was after. I was really trying to put forward, if you like, a couple of supplementary proposals on that. So that would be actually a satisfactory way of taking it forward if officers could have a look at it and see what the practicalities are. I say it really for the reason, I just want to make this point, if I may, Chair, that a lot of this is relatively, what's a community, what level's it at, is a kind of part of the issue, isn't it? Part of it, to my mind, is having, if you like, extremely local things which are at the level of tenement blocks or a number of tenement blocks in an area, so you can see the very practical ways in which that could empower people to have a effective decision-making processes with regard to all of that. I do have one concern, though, and I wonder if maybe somebody could make comment on that, which goes back to the way in which the tenant participation in the 2 matters relating to the housing, the environmental stuff and the small-scale works, because it talks in terms of consultation with tenants through the local housing forums and the tenant and residents groups. Now, not to beat about the bush, there are in my ward now no formal tenant associations. We do have a couple of neighbourhood boards, and there's obviously the Healthy and Happy, the My Place stuff in Spring Hall, but we don't have any tenant groups at all. And the housing forums tend to be now just a couple of elderly ladies and a number of officials. It really has not got the dynamism that these things once had. So I appreciate some clarity as to where decisions are made there, because you don't have an actual tenant association in your area, and if the housing forum isn't particularly dynamic, if you like, how are we going to actually arrive at a decision making by the community in that context? I think it does go to the heart of one of these things. Now, no doubt this will be worked through. I'm not saying we need to have a definitive answer totally today, but I do think it's actually one of the things that lies at the heart of my concerns and some of the concerns other people have been making. And I wondered if Paul could make any observation on that particular point in particular.
Thanks, Robert. I see I've got Cleland's hand and Danny's hand up. So, Cleland, if you'd like to come in first, and then Danny.
I'm just going to give Paul a wee bit of a breather, Chair, if that's okay. So two quick points. If it's helpful to committee, we'll take Councillor Brown's earlier amendment in the new context of some suggested areas for us to go and look at. There are the issues that Geraldine mentioned regarding the use of HRA, etc. But we'll take that away and have a look at. Second point, which is unrelated but more a general point, this is new. And this will take some learning, and we will learn from it, as every authority who's done this work has learned. So we'll not have it nailed absolutely perfectly the first time round, but we will learn each cycle to improve it, to pick up the points that a range of councillors have mentioned today. And in typical time-honoured fashion, in terms of the specific issue about Councillor Brown's ward and tenant forums, can I kick over to Danny Lowe, who will be able to give you a more detailed response. Thanks.
Thanks. Danny?
Thanks, Chair. So I suppose we're thinking through the same ground again, as Geraldine, Cleland and Robert have all picked up. It's the tenants who are funding this programme of work that's contained within the paper today. And it's only right and proper then that we consult with them, because they are actually paying for this programme through their rents. So that's why we consult with them in the strategic priorities. That said, though, when it then develops into a list of projects that we then take forward area by area, and Robert will be aware of this because we've kind of worked this through in the Spring Hall area, when it gets to going forward and taking a project forward, then we do engage with and consult with the wider communities then in relation to specific projects that are on board, and we'll continue to do that then until we have a review of what it is we're doing here, as we've discussed this morning, and determine whether any changes need to be made.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Right, thanks very much. Robert, I'll leave it at that at the present time, okay?
That's fine, thank you, Chair.
Are there any other questions from colleagues? No? Right, I would move the recommendation then.
I'll second, Chair.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone. Let's move on to item 9, which is a review of the current parking management arrangements on pages 77 to 90. And if Michael could give us an update on this, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this report that members have is based on the findings of the cross-party working group and the recommendations arising from the group on the current car parking management arrangements. Chair, I appreciate the report is quite lengthy, so I'll briefly take members through it so I can focus on the recommendations in the report at 6.10, if that is okay.
Yes.
So in section 3 of the report, it sets out the timeline and the stages of how we arrived at establishing the cross-party working group, and it's the number of meetings held, and also its terms of reference. A summary of the discussions is set out in section 4 of the report, and through those discussions, which I would have to say was really quite constructive, very positive, and a very productive way of actually going through, which can sometimes be quite a sensitive issues. It generated 11 options, and those 11 options and the scoring and the assessment of them is set out in the appendix attached to the report. Detail of the actual assessment of those options is narrated in section 5, and this led to the conclusions and recommendations in section 6 of the report, and specifically those are laid out in paragraph 610. So, Chair, I was going to just spend a wee bit more time actually talking through the actual recommendations and also then turn to the timing of them and the financial consequences. So the first recommendation that came from the group is that they agreed that the pre-COVID parking arrangements were appropriate and that charges should be reintroduced for off-street parking from the 1st of April 2021, and that would also include the parking ride areas where there's current charges or previous charges. However, what came from that was a number of changes that were proposed and now being recommended. So for Hamilton, it was agreed to reintroduce the pay on foot in the Duke Street car park, and related to this, introduce a free after 3 p.m. in that same car park. And these proposals, it was considered by the group, would assist the businesses in the town centre. The group also agreed that the current parking management arrangements in East Kilbride were appropriate. However, in a similar vein to Hamilton, it was considered that the village area would benefit from a period of free parking up to 1 hour, and that would relate to both on and off-street parking. In addition to these operational and charging matters, a number of other recommendations were brought forward which reflected the discussion undertaken by the group. Firstly, officers would fully implement the Ringo at existing charging locations. We'd also develop a communication plan just to demonstrate how parking income is invested into transportation maintenance and network improvements, and we felt we maybe get a message across a wee bit better. We'll also look to explore opportunities to enhance parking management using automatic number plate recognition as part of the Ringo cashless parking solutions. But related to that recommendation, it was also agreed that we should approach the Scottish Government with the support of the British Parking Association, the Society of Chief Officers of Transportation in Scotland and other councils for the implementation of necessary legislation to allow councils to use automatic number plate recognition enforcement in the same way that private car parking operators can do so, because at the present time, councils can't do that legally. And then lastly, Chair, the group agreed that phase 1 of the parking demand management review has been completed. It was also accepted that the findings through phase 1 would also relate to East Kilbride, and therefore there was no need to take that forward. The group also considered parking management arrangements across the other town centres and the general view that there was no pressing case for changes to the existing arrangements, with the possibility of a Lanark where there has been discussions and there's further discussions actually required. And therefore the intention was that phase 3 should now not be taken forward, and that would have covered Lanark, Cambuslang, Rutherglen, Straven, Blantyre, Larkhall, Biggar and Killook. But notwithstanding that, officers would continue to work with their local members to understand pressing concerns. But importantly, that would be undertaken by officers, and there was no need to buy in consultants to undertake that work, on the basis that officers and members are fully aware of it, of the issues, and they have a better local understanding. So in terms of the timing of undertaking those recommendations, if they're accepted by committee, recommendations 1 to 5 would be introduced as soon as practical after the 1st of April, whereas recommendations 6 to 8 would be undertaken over the course of the next 6 months and thereafter ongoing as necessary. Recommendation 9 would be undertaken on a phased basis over the next 12 to 18 months. The recommendations 1 and 2 would be permanent. However, 3 and 4 would be introduced on a trial basis to see if it makes the difference in terms of supporting businesses in those areas, and reported back to a future executive committee. And just on a kind of technical note, is that the recommendations 3 and 4 represent a policy change, and they require to be approved by a committee. In terms of financial implications, these were considered by the group and they're referenced within the assessment in the appendix. The intention is that any revenue consequences will be monitored as we continue to hopefully work our way through COVID, whereas the capital costs for the works at Duke Street and associated measures would be met from existing budgets. So, Chair, with that, I'll ask members to refer back to section 2.1 of the report and agree the recommendations. Thank you, and of course happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Michael. That was a very good summation of the report. I was party to that cross-party working group. It worked extremely well, very efficiently. I think the best working party I've ever been a member of. So well done to that. I see there's some hands up. I think John Anderson's first. John?
Yeah, just a comment, if it's all right with you, John.
Yes, thanks.
I found it was my pleasure to chair this officer member, and thankfully it was a short life working group and not one of these ones that goes on for many, many months. And it was good to see that everyone put aside their political differences right from the very start. And by doing that and working together, I think we reached a very successful conclusion, not only for the communities that we serve, but probably more important for the businesses within East Kilbride Village and Hamilton Town Centre. Thanks, John.
Thanks very much, John. Joe?
Thanks. Thanks, Chair. And I would just agree. I think it was a very sort of constructive working group, and I think it was helped by short life group actually being very focused on what what we wanted to see as an outcome. And I know that both myself and Councillor McLachlan certainly appreciated the opportunity to go into the detail, I suppose, of what those pre-COVID parking arrangements were, and you look at them in a kind of rational way, actually, away from it can be a very emotive issue, I think, as any of us that have represent areas where these charges apply will know. But actually, when we looked into the detail, we came up with what, in the face of it, looked like quite modest changes, but it has to be said, changes that I think would have an impact on people's behaviour. That said, I do want to, given that there have been developments since, I do want to pick up one of the recommendations. And this is a recommendation that was made. It was something that, indeed, at the outset that the Labour group had been asking for, was that we put off the reintroduction of charges for the rest of the financial year. I have to say, at that point, in the expectation that come the turn of the financial year, we would be in a better place in terms of COVID, and that we would start to see the reopening of the economy. Now, I know that this is still a developing picture, and obviously there were further announcements yesterday, and we've been watching these 3 weekly reviews. My only concern is that the reopening of retail and the reopening of non-essential retail isn't going to align with the date in which we set. And so, given that the purpose in reintroducing parking charges from the new financial year was more ruling them out for the rest of the financial year, was to sort of give the economy time to kind of come back to normal, and we have subsequently ended up in a further lockdown, and indeed we're now subject to quite an intense lockdown, but more intense than as far as retail is concerned, and the one that they went through previously. Also a lockdown, but we are subject to these 3 weekly reviews, and it doesn't appear that we're going to be in a position to see non-essential retail, certainly not reopen on the 1st of April, and indeed unlikely for several weeks after that. I was going to propose that in relation to the recommendations in 6.10 that the group made, that we do indeed accept all of them, with the exception of that first one. And that's not a reflection in any way in the working group that, as I say, was very constructive. But I think it's just to acknowledge the reality of what's happening in the economy. We've got new variants of the virus. We're in a protracted period of extended restrictions. And I think it would make sense maybe to defer the reintroduction of off-street parking charges. I think it would make sense to defer that particular item until after non-essential retail has been allowed to reopen. But other than that, I can certainly, commend all the other recommendations, and for the reasons that have already been given. I think Michael's report was very comprehensive, and I think the working group was very constructive, and I think it is I think the recommendations are fundamentally sound. With that, one exception just in light of the change in public health environment.
Thanks, Joe. Michael, can I ask what effect that would have on the finances going forward?
Yeah. So at the tail end of my presentation, Chair, I was making the point that it is difficult to predict exactly what the income impact will be, as it's absolutely predicated on how restrictions are going to be eased and how the economy will be actually reopening and at the speed of its reopening. And that's why we've put it in such a way that we'll monitor the income as we move through the restrictions, and through Paul's reports on revenues. It's always continually made the point that it'll be a while as we work through COVID that will continue to have an impact on our income through different services. So unfortunately, I can't give you an exact answer on that, Chair. But if I could maybe just make a comment, and it will obviously be for the committee to take a view, and without repeating what's been said before, is that the cross-party working group looked at all the issues in the round, a very productive, very constructive, and it took away a motive element to it. And I think what the cross-party working group has arrived at is a package of recommendations which recognise that there's need for some change, a need for some messaging, and also a continual review out with the areas where there's no charging. So from my own perspective as an officer, it's a rounded package of recommendations. My slight concern is if you then start to pick one out of the pack and then decide to put that to one side until the timing is right, you kind of lose that cohesive approach to a set of recommendations. I also think, if I can be relatively candid, I think if you don't introduce it now, we will see traffic increase, we will see increased parking demands, and I think it's accepted by the group and by everyone that charging is a management tool. If you don't introduce that at the earliest possible point, you will then lose your chance to introduce it later on, and therefore, at what point do you do that? So I do get the points that Councillor Fagan is making, but that's just my observations, Chair, is that it's much better to do it as a package as opposed to in isolated recommendations, but it'll be for the committee to take a view, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I think I've got Alec. I'll leave you just now, Joe, and bring you back in later in case you want to move an amendment. I'm just a wee bit wary that you were also on that committee and part of the decision we made at that time. But I'll leave it just now in case you do want to make an amendment, and I'll bring in Alec at the present time.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's good to hear about how well the committee had run. It's not one that I was on, so I hope the two aren't connected. The one point I would like just a little bit more clarity on is the phase 3. Indicated that in many of the other towns there is not a requirement to look at what we're doing at the moment, with the exception of Lanark was suggested. Could we have some confirmation that the local members will be consulted on what is needed in Lanark to improve the parking situation there? I'm not sure that we actually got that. It was highlighted that it was discussed, but we didn't get confirmation that that was going to be taken forward.
Right, yeah, Alec.
Chair, if it's okay, I can provide that confirmation, because I was directly involved with discussion with the 3 local members. There was a kind of a concentrated level of discussion just prior to COVID, and then it kind of dissipated after that. And it was some of the issues that are being raised by local members, indeed suggesting that charges perhaps should be brought in to help turnover. But I can give that confirmation that we can pick a particular issue back up, but that applies to all members. I just have to be conscious of the resources that it has or the impact on the resources for officers to do a proper analysis and bring forward measures. But I can certainly give that confirmation and that comfort, hopefully. Chair, thank you.
Okay, I think we've got Monique.
Thanks, Chair. It was just to say that all the points in principle I agree with, although I agree with Joe that it's not something should happen just now. And it's just, I do disagree with Michael McGlynn's opinion that it would be better to introduce it just now. I think that we need to take into account the difficulty that our small to medium enterprises have been put under through the pandemic, as well as obviously everybody else. And you know, 60% of employment in East Kilbride comes from small to medium enterprises, and they're the ones that are getting the rough end of the stick just now, just because of the way things have worked out. So I don't agree with Michael's opinion.
Thanks very much, Marique. No, I must admit I've got a certain sympathy with the idea that we certainly, until we see some non-essential retail coming in, that we do have a look at that. But I'll hand it back to Joe to see what your thoughts are on that, Joe.
Yeah, it's just as I explained. I don't. I mean, I can't imagine these charges are bringing in hellish much just now, given the current restrictions. I think as I say, it's not. I don't see this as being in conflict with the working group, because I think the truth is none of us would have seen these charts that the government are producing just now, or the expectation that of just quite how long we think non-essential retail is going to be locked down for at the time. I think at the outset, I think that 1st of April, Irish looking for recovery boards, as I recall, it would have seemed reasonable at the time, but we wouldn't have known what's happened since. So my amendment, or my suggestion, if it's a suggestion that people accept, it's an amendment that people don't, would just be that we accept all the recommendations. They were all made in good faith, and I think it was, as I say, a constructive group, and I don't want to take anything away from it. It's just that first recommendation that sets the date of the 1st of April. Given that we are still likely to be in restrictions, I would propose that we defer that until after non-essential retail has reopened.
Right, I'm going to bring in another couple of speakers, but then I'll probably ask if anybody would be against that. But I'll see Jim Water. Jim?
Yeah, just to if I give comfort to Alec, you know, I think there's a feeling on the group that, you know, for other areas like Straven, Lanark, Stonehouse, Larkhall, that consultants being brought in really wouldn't necessarily come up with the right answers, because it is the local members that know these areas. I mean, I know some of the problems in Straven, but you know, I'm not a local member there, and you know, there are problems that I probably don't know about. And I think it's important that, you know, everybody takes on board that the local members will have an input to this, and that officers will consult local members about problems, and they'll find solutions that suit the particular areas. I think that's important, because if the local members agree to anything that's done in these areas, then it's more likely to get public acceptance, rather than something that's just imposed from the centre.
Thanks very much, Jim. Josh, I think your hand was up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I instantly agree with Joe. I think it's reasonable to say that we push it back in line with non-essential retail. The reason that we took the decision was to try and reinvigorate local economies, and you know, so that would fall into line with taking that decision, or delaying that decision, which, you know, the timescale that the First Minister announced is non-essential retail will open, I think it's the 26th of April, so we're only delaying it by a few weeks. And also Joe spoke to about how much income the council will have been taken or will have missed out as a result of parking charges not being in place. Duke Street car park, which all of Hamilton's recommendations through the working group has been closed over the past few weeks, because demand is not, or the demand hasn't been there at all to keep it open. So I don't think there has been much demand. And also I would seek assurances from Michael that when these policies are introduced, that Duke Street car park is open, so that the people of Hamilton can too benefit from the recommendations.
Thanks very much, Josh. I'm probably not going to take any more comments on this. If I can maybe put it out there to the committee, would there be anybody against leaving the charges until non-essential retail had been opened up again. Is there anybody who's going to speak against that? John?
No, I'm not going to speak against that. I think it's a wee bit of common sense here, given the situation that everything's in. And I think Josh is right, and others alluded to it. The car parks will still be empty until the non-essential shops actually open up. So I don't think they'd be actually collecting any money. So I think it makes sense to wait that wee bit. I don't think we're going to lose much money, and I think it will help the businesses when they do open, if we wait until the businesses open.
Okay, thanks very much, John. Cleland, I see you get your hand up.
Chair, just so we're clear, because I'm detecting from committee they're agreeing to the proposal from Councillor Fagan. Just to avoid a further cycle of papers and meetings, then we'll record that as that we defer the introduction of charging until such time as non-essential retail reopens. So the decision by committee relates to the recommendations in the report, but the timing is to coincide with the Scottish Government announcement about non-essential retail reopening, and then we'll introduce from that point onwards, so we don't need to wait in a further committee cycle.
Thanks very much. Yes, that's exactly.
John,
okay.
Can I just say to Cleland, that's off-street parking. We've already introduced on-street parking, not just parking as a whole.
Sorry,
it's just the off-street.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just to clarify it.
Right, okay, listen, thanks very much, colleagues, for taking a decision on that item. Let's move on to item 10, which is the Glasgow City Region deal, Stuart Fail Yates Kilbride, and it's pages 91 to 100. And Michael, if you could possibly update us on this report, please.
Yes, of course, Chair. And again, Chair, so quite a lengthy report again. So I'll try to be brief and taking members through the report, and then I can focus on the actual main issues itself. So if you could probably just bear with me for a wee minute or two. So members will recall that an update on the development of the project design was provided in the 25th of March last year. That report set out the results of the extensive consultation exercise undertaken in November and December 2019, and how this informed establishing the design parameters for the project before moving to the next stage of the business case. And a summary of that consultation exercise is set out in quite a bit of detail in section 5 of the report. From that paper, it was agreed to progress and review the augmentation of the previously agreed strategic business case. And I think that's important just to remember that the committee has agreed to a strategic business case, but the augmentation of the case was to reflect the design development and to some extent a passage of time as well. And this report that's before you is an update on that work and also sets to set out the actual next steps. I think at this point it's important to recognise the purpose of and also the level of detail that is within a strategic business case. And really, in short, it is by its nature a very high-level document that seeks to test whether a project is a strategic fit with programme objectives. And the programme in this case is City Deal objectives. And these are set out in section 4.1 of the report. And that is to increase economic growth, improve connectivity, support growing population, and importantly, provide high quality locations for investment and economic activity. So subject to this committee's approval, a review of the detailed economic drivers for the project will then be undertaken as part of the outline business case process, which is the next stage after the strategic. And it's at that stage that the business case will identify in more detail the development opportunities that these infrastructure works will open up within the defined area of East Kilbride, as well as quantifying the GVA, jobs created and supported within South Lanarkshire and the wider city region up to 2035. And so again, just looking at the long-term impact of the project. Nonetheless, it is recognised at this stage how this project will meet these strategic city deal objectives. And what's being proposed is that this will be done by delivering interventions to our transport network to provide capacity to transport goods and services, which in summary is our economy, which will in turn support economic development and employment opportunities, but also importantly provide increased choice for travel methods. And these interventions are set out in 6.3 of the report, and they strongly link to the consultation feedback I mentioned in section 5, and also importantly consistent with the agreed report in March 2020. So just briefly to describe them, is that they comprise of the development of a dedicated segregated cycleway and walkway along the northern side of Stuartfield Way, and this will support shift to more sustainable travel. In the same vein, seek to accelerate the implementation of wider East Kilbride Active Travel Plan. We also will be looking to develop proposals to relieve and manage existing traffic congestion at the western end of Stuartfield Way, i.e. Phillips Hill Junction, to provide increased capacity, and this would hopefully assist in improving access to the proposed relocated Hairmire station, which we would wish to develop into a strategic regional parking ride interchange. We're looking to introduce enhanced bus infrastructure such as bus shelters, real-time information, new pedestrian crossing points along Stuartfield Way corridor and also the surrounding area. And from this, we'll engage with bus operators to encourage and provide more frequent services, because we are conscious that the transportation or the bus services within that part of the town can be fragmented. We'll also look to enhance the facilities for low carbon transport through the provision of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And a very key and significant part of the project is proposals to relieve and manage existing traffic congestion at the eastern end of Stuartfield Way in and around Kingsgate Maver Avenue. And this will look to provide increased capacity to cater for future growth arising from site development. And this would include a new dual carriageway from the James Hamilton Heritage Lot, not in front of the loch, I would emphasise, towards the Kingsgate Junction. And in our estimation, this will result in a significant reconfiguration and upgrading of that existing junctions, and also perhaps enhanced access into the retail park. As I said, at this point, the business case process, further work is required to detail the project design and specification in terms of economic outputs. Nonetheless, an indication of such measures are set out in paragraph 4.6 of the report, but those details will come through the outline business case and ultimately the final business cases themselves. Having said all of that, I do appreciate that such a high-level strategic business case may not provide the level of detail that members may be seeking, such as detailed road layouts, the placement of bus infrastructure, which sites will come forward and how many jobs may arise from this development, although we do provide an indication within the report itself. However, I would say that this is simply a reflection of the nature of business cases and the process that is required to go through to comply with the UK Green Book process, and therefore in turn accesses city deal funding. So it's very much a process-driven exercise at this stage. In recognising all of that, my suggestion to the committee, if they are supportive of the case today, is that I would suggest that a members' awareness session is held at an appropriate point through the preparation of the outline business case and prior to it being reported back to committee later this year. I would emphasise, whilst it's important to approve the SBEC today, this is not the last and final decision. You'll see from the timetable within the report, there's a number of staging points. However, the OBC is probably the most important part of that. So another consideration, if the SBC isn't progressed today, we would have to report this through our city deal structures, which may or may not affect the future consideration as part of the overall programme. However, what is clear at this stage is that through the production of the SBC, and bearing in mind it's an augmented SBC, the committee some time ago has approved the strategic business case, is that the design development fits with the city deal objectives in terms of its support for economic development, addresses traffic congestions at two key junctions at Phillips Hill and Kingsgate. It has the benefit of improving access to the proposed relocated Hairmire station. It will facilitate improved public transportation provision through enhanced bus infrastructure. It will support active travel and encourage modal shift and provide enhanced facilities for low carbon traffic through EV charging points. So taken together, it is my view that this provides a robust basis to take it to the next level of the business case development. In terms of next stages and timescales, SBC sets out an indication of when the project will progress through each stage of both the approval process and on-site delivery, and this is set out in paragraph 7.1. And again, just emphasising that the next key stage is the reporting of the OBC at the turn of this year. And again, as mentioned before, if the members are content with the SBC today, we would certainly look to incorporate a members awareness session or sessions prior to the OBC being reported back to committee. So Chair, just before I conclude and pass back to yourself, we received a consultation pro forma from Councillor Watson, and within that, this raised 3 questions. So I will now advise a committee of those questions and the response, and understand that once I've concluded this pro forma with the questions and answers will be circulated to all members via Pauline McRae, and hopefully Pauline will nod her head to say I've got that right. Yep, thank you. So I'll just read out the questions and the responses we provided to Councillor Watson. So the first question was, what cognizance has been given to post-pandemic work travel patterns in the revised strategic business case? Our response to Councillor Watson is, as set out in the committee report, while there is a need to consider the short-term effects of COVID on travel and transportation behaviours, it is important to look beyond the immediate horizon and make plans to ensure the transport network is capable in the long term of accommodating increasing demands resulting from new development and increased freight movement, and the opportunities for genuine sustainable travel choices are maximised. Further modelling will be undertaken as the project develops and progresses to outline business case. However, as expected, as restrictions are eased over time, that daily traffic levels will return to pre-COVID-19 oblique normal, albeit the daily profile may change. So not within the text, I think that does reflect that we would expect to see traffic levels returning. We've seen that when we came out the initial lockdown, and indeed you can see traffic levels actually increasing as we are just now. So the second question that was asked was, have allowances been made in the revised strategic business case for the relocation of the tax office? Our response is, the primary rationale for the project is to support net additional economic value through investment and site development that is currently constrained by transport network. This will be worked through in more detail as part of the outline business case. However, the assumption will be that the tax office forms a key part of this investment and site development as the current use as the HMRC Centre 1 moves to its new location in Glasgow City Centre, and plans are brought forward for the reuse and/or redevelopment of the site by its owners. The type of activity the site will host will be subject to review through the strategy planning process. So the third and last question is quite a long question, but I will read it out verbatim. It says, whilst welcome the active travel aspects of the business case, the inclusion of improved business infrastructure, what discussions have taken place with bus operators and SPT regarding providing a frequent and improved service along Stewartfield Way and in the Stewartfield oblique Nerston area in general? At the moment, the service is virtually non-existent. What is being done to ensure that a bus service is provided in this area once the works have been completed? Our response to this is that the Council are in regular dialogue with the bus operators and SPT via a variety of forums, and will, subject to the approval of the strategic business case, have a more focused discussion with them over the next 12 months to explain the proposals, investments planned in bus infrastructure, and what opportunities there are to deliver improved services as part of that project. So, Chair, I would expect that paperwork now to be circulated to all members. So just in conclusion, Chair, and thanks for being with me, is that on the basis that the committee approves the strategic business case today and the recommendations at section 2.1, it will be submitted to City Deal Chief Execs Group on the 19th of May and then on to the City Deal Cabinet on the 1st of June for consideration and approval. So with all of that, Chair, I'll pass back to yourself and of course happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael, for that very full report. And I presume, Pauline, you're circulating Councillor Watson's pro forma as we speak?
That's being circulated at the moment, Chair.
Thank you very much. And what I'll do is I'll take questions on this now. I see Monique's has her hand up. Monique?
Thanks, Chair. I'm supportive of the dualling of all of Stuartfield Way as it was originally presented to the committee in 2014. And with this in mind, I also welcome the positive economic impacts that the knock-on effect of the project would have when it's commencing and also completing, which are reflective, obviously, in the officer's report for points 4.6. The original proposal was about taking heavy traffic away from the residential streets and putting it into the periphery of East Kilbride. What's been suggested now with the dualling, if I've got Michael correct, is that from where the A77 comes in, it's going to carry on to the Museum of Rural Life. Then the dualling will stop and then it's going to start again just around about the James Hamilton Heritage Park, which in my opinion will create a bottleneck in the middle. So you'll then have your locked grid right in the middle of Stuartfield. I support the green economy and also the sustainable transport capacity enhancements as part of the collective drive for the economic growth across the city region. I believe that the ends must justify the means. So I would say to my fellow elected members who are in council either before me or have joined me in 2017, I would say to them that I think we would all agree there's already a considerable amount of time that has been spent on this project, but I don't believe this proposal is one, clear enough, or two, delivers what's required. Therefore, I don't support this paper as I believe that the environmental issues are more prevalent today than a business case made 20 years ago, and this report puts us in a worse place environmentally. This report doesn't clearly stop the exacerbation of traffic, stop the increased congestion, will further perpetuate traffic problems in Stuartfield and indeed West Mains, which is then going to affect 2 primary schools, and I don't believe it will stop car idling. I think it's a sticking plaster of a proposal. It's not worth the construction work and the knock-on effects it would actually have to the environment. It doesn't fix, obviously, the car idling problem, which pollutes the environment, or fix the gridlock at prime traffic times, which is the reason why we would be doing this in the first place. So I would ask my fellow councillors to support me in rejecting this paper back to the drawing board. And as I said at the very beginning, I'm supportive of the dualling of all of Stuartfield Way. And I know somebody will come back and say, well, we don't have the money. Well, that's when we need to then go and find the money, because there's no point in doing something for the sake of it if it's not going to give us the outcomes that we actually need, deserve and require for our communities. Anyway, thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much for your comments. Jim Wardhaw.
I'm not convinced that, without a flyover at Kingsgate retail park area, that this is going to make a great difference to east-west traffic flow in East Kilbride. But one thing that I think might help, and I'm just wondering if the council has been in any discussions with Transport Scotland about possible improvements to the trunk route, i.e. the Kingsway and the Queensway, where roundabout problems cause congestion and push traffic towards the Kingsgate, which might actually use the trunk route if the roundabouts were increased in capacity. I know that Transport Scotland did a scope in at least one of the roundabouts at Birney Hill to see what the cost of putting a third lane in. Have the council had any sort of discussions with Transport Scotland about
ways of improving the trunk route, which would take traffic away from the Kingsgate area and still give a proper east to west flow of traffic.
Michael.
Through you, Chair, our roads officers are in continual dialogue with Transport Scotland to always look to improve our network, and whether that manifests itself through physical improvements to the roundabouts. I'm aware that there has been discussions on that. I don't have that detail at hand at this point in time, but I'm happy to pick that up with officers and pass that back through committee clerks. But I think the fundamental point is, if it's possible, just to go back and pick up on some of Councillor McAdam's issues, if that's okay, Chair, just to maybe give a bit of clarity. And of course, it's then for members to take a view on this. So again, if you could maybe just kind of bear with us for a moment or two. I think what you find here is a change in thought process within bringing forward road schemes. There used to be the kind of mantra of predict and provide, where you predicted a traffic flow and therefore then just simply provided for it, and very much a kind of engineering solution. What's coming forward now in terms of a thought process is predict and decide. Again, it may sound a bit of a kind of cliche, but you decide how to manage that increase. And I think when you look at the component parts of this project, I do accept that there's a need to do improvements at Phillips Hill to improve that capacity. There's absolutely a need to do the dualling from the Heritage Lock to Kingsgate and to look at those junctions in around Kingsgate and Maver Avenue. I think there is a need for a traditional engineering solution there. However, what we are now proposing is that when we decide to manage increase traffic, we need to look at modal shift. We have to look at bus services, improve the bus infrastructure. We have to look to try and bring forward the relocation of Hairmire Station to get people on trains and off our roads. We have to improve our active travel infrastructure to allow people to have that opportunity. And I think collectively that should take vehicles off the road. Those vehicles that still require to go on the road, we want to provide a much more carbon neutral ways of actually doing that through electric charging points. So I do take Councillor McAdam's points, and I do recognise the issues, but from an officer's point of view, our ways of addressing that has to move forward from simple engineering solutions. We have to provide opportunities for modal shift, and I think that is what this proposal is now bringing forward, Chair. So, but just thanks for the opportunity to come back in those comments.
No, thanks for clarifying that, Michael. Robert?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I've got considerable sympathy with what has been said by Jim and Monique on this, because I think we run the risk of ending up with a compromise solution that doesn't achieve what we're actually looking for before. There's a lot of time has passed since the original members' awareness events, and the constraints of COVID mean that the thing has been obviously delayed because of that sort of thing. And I do think there's actually considerable change in what's being proposed. I welcome the idea of a members' awareness session, but it does seem to me that the decision on this should be made after that awareness session and not before. It seems to me that we're merit in continuing the matter. We've got a certain amount of time, it seems to me, unless I'm corrected on the detail. The matter doesn't come to the City Deal Cabinet until the 19th of May. I don't suppose they're particularly obsessed by the date of our meeting today. There is an executive on the 28th of April, or a special meeting could be called if necessary. I know there's some administrative inconvenience to all of that. But I think there's a democratic imperative here. This is a complex, major proposal, significant magnitude to it. The controversy is quite significant around some of the issues to do with it. I think it's hugely important that it's both understood and supported by elected members and by the wider public. Now, there was a certain logic to the original plan, as Jim has said, with the flyover at Kingsgate, but I certainly got a sense that the road improvements in the middle will simply enhance the snarl up at either end of the road, and as Monique has said, perhaps in the middle as well, and may not achieve the traffic improvements wanted. there's a sort of paradox, isn't there, with these road improvements? Because if it's successful, making travel along Stewartfield Way easier, then it attracts more traffic onto the road, as all road developments like this do. A lot of that traffic is through traffic, having nothing directly to do with East Kilbride. Obviously, a lot of it is East Kilbride traffic too. And it's not particularly desirable. We attract more traffic of that kind to travel through East Kilbride, if you like. So in short, I think this matter should be continued until after the proposed members' awareness session, in whatever format appropriate to do that. But at the moment, the Liberal Democrat group are not persuaded that the project as it now stands is in the interests of East Kilbride. We are persuadable, but we're not currently persuaded. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks for your comments. Joe?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Some sympathy with what Robert Brown had just suggested. I think the key point here is surely before we're voting on an item of such importance, you would want to have as much detail in front of you as possible. And I think there is a consensus that the paper isn't perhaps given that detail that elected members are looking for, and given the scale of the project, it's not something that, frankly, the Labour group would be prepared to support today. The Labour group, I appreciate that things have changed and that time has moved on. I did move against the proposal as it was, as is currently in a previous form when it came to a meeting of leaders under delegated powers. My concern, as has been raised, is that we can't know just now, or apparently do know just now, but we don't have in front of us the traffic modelling that satisfies us that there's not going to be that knock-on effect on other parts of the town if we don't get this right. We do know that there is unmet demand, as it were. We do know that there is congestion. I expect there's opposition to this project from different quarters. There are people who are concerned about the project anyway, in any kind of engineering work on that road, and there are people like myself who are concerned that the more we augment it and the further away we come from what was initially proposed, that we run the risk of, frankly, trying to please everyone and ended up pleasing no one and not fundamentally addressing the reason why this was put forward as a project in the first place. I don't think I've got any real clarity here about what is being proposed in relation to the junctions. I think we know what we're not now agreeing to, but I'm not really any further forward with what we are agreeing to. And I am concerned, as has been said, that by only dueling part of the road, we could actually push the congestion towards the residential area, whereas what we should be trying to do is take congestion away from residential areas. So, I mean, for all those reasons, I would be minded to, and also there's another point, I think in terms of environmental impact, I think obviously we know whenever we have a roads building project that there's going to be an environmental impact, but what we want to do is obviously assess that and work out on balance, is it something that is desirable because of the impact elsewhere? And I think that's the bit that from this augmented case where we've not really got the assurance about. So all in all, I'm just not really convinced with the direction in which the project is going. I would not be minded to support the augmented case. I think it's still possible to get a case taken to that city deal because it's investment that should be coming to East Kilbride, and if I had my way, would already be getting spent in East Kilbride. But the project as it currently is, I have to say, it is a departure. I think there's an attempt to please people. I would say for political reasons, and we're going to end up in a position where we're actually pleasing nobody. And for those reasons, I wouldn't be minded to support the proposal. I have to say, I think there's some merit, at least in what Robert Brown was suggesting, which is that actually, if there is further information to come forward, we should see that before we're actually taking a vote on
it. Thanks for these comments, Joe. If you remember, when you say trying to please people, we actually had a duty and said we would go out and we would publicly consult on the matter, which we actually did, and we're acting on the basis of what we received in those consultations. So I think, what we're trying to do is get a measured response to this, but I'll move on to Alec just now.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. actually see this as a step forward from where we were and addressing a number of issues. As you've said, there was a consultation, participatory budgeting in action maybe. There is the points that Councillor Watson raised were the ones that I would want to be associated with. First of all, putting the infrastructure in for buses is fine. But then if you don't have any buses running, it's pretty irrelevant. So I think further down the line, we need to see as part of this a package of how we are going to improve the public transport situation. So as Michael has said, you then bring in the issues regarding a new rail station and parking up at Hairmyres. All need to become part of this as well to improve the transport situation. The one bit that is very difficult for us as councillors to equate to is what the effect it's going to have. And I think we really need to, in this case, look to the officers who have done the modelling and try to identify what is going to happen with traffic. And bear in mind, a lot of this will be unsure as well, because what is going to be the knock-on effect of people learning to use the likes of Teams as we are today? Is there going to be as many people travelling to work for office work, etc.? Is there going to be a higher percentage at home? Is that going to affect the overall transport requirements? So, yeah, I think this is a step forward. There is other issues that need to come into it at later stages, but as a high-level strategic plan, it's certainly a big step forward. And if these areas that I've highlighted can be covered later as part of the detailed planning, it will certainly be beneficial.
Thanks very much for these comments, Alec. Jerry?
Sorry, Chair. Colleagues, for the people who don't know Stuartfield Way, I beg your indulgence because I'm going to talk about things and folks say, what does he mean by that? Chair, I would start by saying I thought the economic case was made back in 2014, because I'm sitting with papers here, the 9th of July for the Chief Executive City Deal Initiative, and we get money from the City Deal cabinet to basically dual Stuartfield Way, improve Green Hills Road, which is now nearing completion, Cathkin Bypass. The money was approved because the case was merited. And if we go back to the paper that's before us today, basically on page 99, it tells you this project is a long-held priority for South Lanarkshire Council, encompassed within the local development plans and transport strategies for 20 years. And when it was approved a way back in 2014, because I was there, it was approved unanimously by every political party. Now getting back to the nitty-gritty, and it's been said by Monique and by Robert Brown and Joe Fagan and others. If we go ahead with the proposals that the officers who were there in 2014 are the same officers that are here today in 2021, they want to change it. I understand and I agree with Michael McGlynn from the Kingsgate to Maver Avenue, and my apologies for folk who don't know what I'm talking about here, but that's the start of Stuartfield Way. It's imperative, and that was Michael's words, that we dual that. Well, we'll dual that, we'll get to the heritage lock, we'll get into a single lane, then we'll go up through the most highly dense areas of Stuartfield where the population stay. We'll get to the agricultural college, then it'll go back to a dual carriageway, because that goes from the Queensway at the Holiday Inn up to the tax centre. So we're going to have the start of it at one end, the start of it at the other end. They two bits will be dualled, and then we'll get into the most unholy bloody gridlock that's ever been seen. And I'll finish with this, Chair. The reason it was put forward in 2014, it was to take heavy traffic away from the urban areas of East Kilbride and take it round basically a dual carriageway network. It would go down the expressway, it would go through the underpass, which is now going up to Bulls Brae, which is all dual, and it would take you to the M8. So I don't see in the road to Damascus what's changed. If anything, we're near its saturation point with the volume of traffic. That's no my words. That's the officers for the roads department's words, basically over the piece. So I would ask colleagues, I think we should defer it. I don't think we're getting the real picture. And you take your observations, Chair, which is quite right. Yes, we did do participatory budgeting and we consulted in people. There's over 10,000 people live in Stewartfield. We get 1,500 replies. So getting back to Alison's point about how we involve the community, I just say to myself, and I don't know how this will go, but I just say to myself, I'm looking at one of the bullet points. 76% of people who were interviewed believed Stewartfield Way was an important route for various transport modes. That's totally correct. 29% of respondents considered they were regularly delayed on Stewartfield Way. Well, traffic's increasing. And you take the points of maybe some of my colleagues are talking about the ecosystem and a greener economy. Well, by 2035, we're hoping to get rid of electric and diesel cars and buses and lorries. So it's not about the emissions. It's about the gridlock that's going to happen halfway along that Stewartfield Way. And that's the important issue. I think at times it gets missed. The money's already there. It was approved in 2014 by the City Cabinet. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jerry. I'm just a wee bit worried that an awful lot of us have suddenly become experts in road management, even though our expertise might not lie in that. If our officers have looked at this and modelled it and have said that they believe that a certain thing can be achieved by the route that we've got here, I'm not saying that a briefing for councillors is not something that we should be doing at some point in the future, but certainly from the point of view that anything that's been put forward as for this strategic case has been modelled by our officers, and they believe that the GVA and this satisfies the project at this time and not what it was 10, 12, 15 years ago. But I'll bring in, if somebody wants to answer some of Jerry's questions, then certainly I'll bring in Michael just to see if he's got anything to say from Jerry's point of view.
Yeah, happy to do so, Chair. Maybe just to pick up on a few points, and apologies to members, but I have to go back to my introduction to the report and kind of emphasise the purpose of a strategic business case. So, there has been reference to the flyover, but that simply is not affordable. We can't afford to do the flyover, so that isn't a part of the scheme. When we went out for consultation, we reported back in March. The committee agreed. I do take Councillor Fagan's a point that there was a move against it, but committee agreed that was the design parameters for the officers to go away and work on the strategic business case and come back and provide an update on that augmented strategic business case, and that's what we have done as officers, as agreed by the committee. I would have to say that if there is a feeling within the committee to defer this and to have a members awareness session prior to the SBC being considered again, there's kind of 2 points to take into account. We need to organise that, the practical aspect of fitting it in the diary, but we also need to bear in mind the lead-in times to report it to our chief execs and to the Cabinet. And my feeling is that that will probably delay it, perhaps going to the Cabinet until at least the 29th of July. And that would be a further delay that we'd have to report through the governance structures. And then, if I'm being very candid with you, that may then start to have other authorities look and say, is that project real? Will we start to look at our own projects and try to seek South Lanarkshire's funding? And I'm just being very candid with you there. The second point, Chair, and I'll finish with the second point, is, of course, if members feel they want to have a members' awareness session on SBC and we're instructed to do so, of course we will do that. However, the information that we have at this point in time is contained within the SBC. We can talk that more through an awareness session, but the level of detail that you're looking for will come forward through the development of the OBC. So I do feel that we'll be in a catch-22 situation where we will turn up at the members' awareness session, explain to you perhaps more fully the SBC, but the level of detail will come through the development of the OBC, and I can't move on to the OBC until the SBC is approved. So I'm feeling that I may just end up going round in a catch-22 situation. However, Chair, it's for members to take a view on that and obviously do whatever's instructed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. Listen, I think we've probably had enough discussion in this item. It appears to be individual views that are coming forward. There is a recommendation there, and I would propose at this point in time to move to the recommendation unless anyone is otherwise minded.
Chair,
yes.
Otherwise minded. I think there's a number of us with our hands up actually, but certainly I'm otherwise minded. I think Robert Brown suggested earlier that we should push this back until after we've had the full briefing. We can then make the judgment about after that whether that's something we're content to proceed with. But let that information be presented, and particularly the traffic modelling be presented. And if that was what Robert Brown proposed earlier, I would be happy to second it just now.
Joe, I can say as a member of the City Cabinet that there are other authorities looking over our shoulder about where we are going with Stewartfield Way, and some areas have never had projects put in and are only too happy to see something fail as far as South Lanarkshire is concerned, and they would be right in with another project. So we're dicing on very dodgy ground here by delaying this. This is only a strategic business case. The ramifications of how we go about looking at the detail of this is something that can be done after the business case is supported. But if you're moving that, then that's fine.
Well, I'm entitled to move it, and I have to say I'm much more concerned about the constant sort of chopping and changing of the project. I have to say the departure from the original project's what concerns me, and as I say, we could have been further ahead with this. So I think on the basis Robert's made, I think, a sensible suggestion. There is the time, as far as I can see. I want to see money spent in Stewartfield Way. I think we all want to see the money spent in Stewartfield Way, but we want clarity about what we're signing up to. And I think we do want to see if there's scope to augment this further. If it's consistent with the position I took when we last debated it.
Right, thanks very much.
John, can I just come in on that? I back Jerry Convery here because he's 100% right.
Joe, I'm not allowing any more discussion. We've got
that's all right. Everybody else has said 7, 10.
I know, John, we could go on talking about this all day.
I'm only backing Jerry.
Right, okay, thanks very much, Joe. Can we move to a vote, Pauline, on the amendment versus a motion?
Yeah, just confirm I'm moving that amendment, Chair.
Sorry. First of all, I need a seconder for the recommendations contained in the report which you proposed. Councillor Ross, do you have a seconder?
I'll second that, Pauline.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, I have an amendment which was proposed by Councillor Brown and seconded by Councillor Fagan, which was that consideration of the proposal be continued to allow a members' awareness session to be held and for further information to be provided on the project, and that would include traffic modelling. Am I correct in the amendments?
That's fair enough, Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll now move to a vote by roll call. So if you would state your preference for motion or amendment, please. Councillor Allison.
Motion.
Councillor Anderson.
Motion.
Councillor Bradley.
Motion.
Councillor Brown.
Amendment.
Councillor Callaghan. Councillor Callaghan. Councillor Callaghan, I see you're still in the meeting. Would you state a preference for motion or amendment?
Motion.
Thank you. Councillor Chalmers.
Motion.
Councillor Convery.
Amendment.
Councillor Cooper.
Amendment.
Councillor Corbett.
Motion.
Councillor Craig.
Motion.
Councillor Devlin.
Amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Dorman.
Motion.
Councillor Fagan.
Amendment.
Councillor Faulkner.
Amendment.
Councillor Hamilton.
Amendment.
Councillor Logan.
Amendment.
Councillor Loudon.
Motion.
Councillor Lowe.
Amendment.
Councillor McAdams.
Amendment.
Councillor McCreary.
Motion.
Councillor McGuigan.
Motion.
Councillor Miller.
Motion.
Councillor Nealon.
Motion.
Councillor Nelson.
Motion.
So, Councillor Nealon, can I just confirm what your preferred vote was?
Motion.
Thank you. Councillor Ross.
Motion.
Councillor Shearer.
Motion.
Councillor Wardhall.
Amendment.
Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
I can confirm that we have 17 votes for the motion and 11 votes for the amendment. The motion is declared carried.
Thanks very much, Pauline. Move on to item 11, which is land and property transfers and disposals, pages 106, 101 to 106. And can I have Danny Lowe to give us an update on this, please, Danny?
Thanks for that, Chair. In section 4 of this report and in Appendix A, it refers to an area of land adjacent to Glengate Primary School in Lark Hall that we're proposing transfers from community and enterprise resources to education resources for the formation of some additional playground space at the facility. Also, as noted in the report, we're seeking approval to transfer a plot of land which is adjacent to the new nursery in Kitmuir Hill, and that's currently held in the housing account, and we're looking to transfer that to education to provide an outdoor teaching space. In Appendix 2, which is in page 104 of your papers today, details 2 small plots of land that are next to 5 Ashburton Park in East Kilbride and also 17 Davidson Lane in Kirlook that we're seeking to have declared surplus so that we can conclude negotiations for the disposal with the adjacent owners. So members have been asked today to approve the recommendations that are set out in section 2 of the report. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Danny. Does any colleague have any questions to ask? No, I don't see any hands.
No hands, Chair.
Move the recommendation.
I'll second, Chair.
Thanks very much. We move on to, is everybody agreed?
Agreed.
We move on to move on to item 12, which is the former Vogue Bingo site Hamilton and the proposed sale to Clyde Valley. Can I ask Michael to give a report on this, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report, members, is, as the Chair has said, is to seek approval to the sale of the Vogue Bingo to Clyde Valley Housing Association. For those that are familiar with the building, it closed back in 1997 and it has remained unoccupied since then. It is a Grade B listed building, essentially the facade, which is only part that's retaining of it. The council took ownership of the building back in 1998 as part of a land consolidation exercise as part of Hamilton Ahead. But despite a number of planned projects, none has actually come forward. As part of the preparation of the Hamilton Town Centre strategy, the public consultation identified the Vogue as a priority redevelopment and in particular a strong desire to retain the existing facade. As I mentioned, there has been a lot of interest over the period, but none has actually been delivered on site. And there's a continued lack of real and tangible current market interest within the site. In terms of the current proposal, there's already funding directed towards the site via the Town Centre Capital Fund, and that is allocated £440,000, and that was approved through a Community and Enterprise Committee previously. The development which has been brought forward is for 23 homes, and that's a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom flats, and it will importantly retain the facade to the front. If this is agreed today, there is hopeful that works on the site will start in the summer of this year and complete late 2022. The issues with the site are quite significant in terms of its development. I mentioned the retention of the facade, the ground conditions is a very tight site, very constrained, and all of this adds to the development costs. The town centre funding will help bridge that financial gap, otherwise it would not be financially viable. In addition, the costs which have been brought forward to develop the proposal have been reviewed by officers, and in conclusion that has resulted in recognising that the site doesn't have a market value. In essence, the actual costs of a redevelopment is outweighed by the values. It's recognised that the actual key benefits from developing the site, it completely is consistent with the council's approved strategy for the town centre. It will prioritise town centre living, and it'll also bring footfall within the town centre. It'll also bring back a derelict site back into use, and it will keep a valued landmark also. And also supports delivering on the community wealth building agenda, which we've talked about earlier today. And in terms of financial aspects, it will lever in just over £3.65 million in terms of development costs within the actual town centre itself. So in terms of financial implications, I mentioned before, the costs in excess of £300,000 associated with extensive works to require the development to go ahead exceeds the market value. There's also ongoing costs that have to be met in terms of maintaining the facade and dealing with environmental issues, which is costing between £3,000 and £5,000 per year. And it is on this basis, Chair, that we feel in this instance that a sale for a nominal value of £1 reflects best value for the council over and above the community benefits, and it removes a future capital and revenue liabilities. So with that, Chair, I would ask members to consider the recommendations at 2.1 and ask that they be agreed. Thank you, and happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Michael. I'm looking for questions from colleagues, and I see that Councillor Cooper has a hand up first, followed by Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. As one leader said, she who complains of every development in Hamilton Town Centre. However, on this occasion, I think this is an excellent development for Hamilton Town Centre. It's been lying empty for 20 years. It's a part of the town that absolutely requires to be developed and bring footfall back into that area. There's a potential for other buildings round about there, for example, Old Salvation Army Hall, etc., to be further developed. And I think this would be a great starting point for that bottom end of Hamilton Town Centre. It's been very run down looking for years, and it's directly, easily accessible into the Quarry Street area and Cadra Street shops, and I think it'll make a tremendous difference to that part of the town. So well done, and I hope Clyde Valley Housing Association deliver a good deal for the housing department. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much for your comments, Margaret. Most welcome. Josh?
Thank you, Chair, and I also welcome Margaret's comments. I'm pleasantly surprised, and long may it continue. But yeah, like Margaret, I welcome the development, which, as Michael said, will fill an important gap site that's been vacant for too long, and also bring much needed modern social housing to the town. As I said, the site's been vacant for a considerable time, and although there has been interest, it's always fell away due to the viability of the project. So whilst the sale, and I've noticed that Alan Faulkner's got his hand up afterwards, so I know that you'll probably comment on this, but whilst the sale at £1 may have seemed cheap without context, the estimated total abnormal cost, which amongst other things will maintain the historic facade, which is important to the people of Hamilton, is going to cost around £330,000. I think it's also important that we take this in the context of the wider town centre regeneration work that's been going for a number of years, which has seen through Scottish Government regeneration funding the old Hamilton Advertiser building being regenerated by the same developer, the new UWS site, the Hamilton Green development that's ongoing too, and also the investment that was in the Old Town Hotel now Premier Inn, and take that as a whole package. And as I say, I welcome the report, and I look forward to the development and working with the Housing Association as we go forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Josh. Councillor Callaghan. You're on mute.
Can I just check you can hear me okay now, Chair?
Yes.
Sorry, I've had a wee problem with my headset this morning. Thanks. Yep, certainly I agree with everything that Councillor Cooper and Councillor Wilson have said. As a local councillor for this area, it's really, really great to see this coming forward. The Vogue Cinema is really impressive. It's an important facade. And the 2018 Town Centre Strategy, which was developed through consultation with local people, identified quite rightly that this was a really key site for development here. So I know there have been challenges, Michael's spoken about them. There's been a number of plans that have come forward, including the recent mixed-use residential and retail development. Despite lots of work from the council and from Hamilton Business Improvement District as well, there has been a struggle to actually see some progress there. However, it's really good now to have these firm plans in place at last, and really looking forward to seeing this in 2022, seeing this development completed here. As we're all aware, our town centres are changing quite dramatically, and town centre living is going to be absolutely critical to Hamilton's success. The new bid manager was recruited towards the end of last year, Malcolm Thomas Harley. I don't think the job was quite what he expected there, because it was when we thought we were kind of moving out of lockdown. But his drive and enthusiasm has been really impressive. He's got a lot of fresh ideas for the town. And although the bid focuses on supporting town centre businesses and driving this forward, Malcolm really recognises the value of involving local people and communities. And he's been reaching out to make important connections with the communities. I've been working quite closely with him to support that there. So there are a number of initiatives underway which aren't quite yet visible, but I'm really excited around the future of Hamilton Town Centre. And I know that people have been frustrated with the perceived lack of progress. Margaret Cooper mentioned it earlier on there as well. However, there is a lot of work going on in the background. It'll be great to see this housing go up and watch this space, because there's going to be a lot more visible changes coming very soon indeed. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Councillor Nayland.
Chair, could I have a point of order first, please?
Yes,
Thank you. I wonder if you could remind councillors to make sure that they're on mute, because there's been at least one councillor who hasn't, and I've heard a number of personal comments directed at other councillors before they were speaking.
Thanks very much. Can I remind councillors of their code of conduct during these meetings? And it really is essential that you do remember to keep your mic off and try to maintain some level of decency during these meetings. I'll go on now to Councillor Nayland.
Thank you, Chair. In order to try and bring this meeting to a close eventually, I will be very brief. I found myself in the unusual position of concurring with Councillors Cooper and Wilson today, and hope to again at some point perhaps. But I too welcome this report. It's been a long time coming as various initiatives have fallen through, and it's going to be a great start for that part of Hamilton Town.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Alan.
Thanks, Chair. I thought I was in another same meeting, deja vu, for 18 months ago, when we get told the Hamilton strategy plan about a derelict building at the top of Quarry Street. This building's at the bottom of Quarry Street, where we were going to get this all done up. We sold it for 100,000, though the person that the leaseholder get 800,000 for it for Wetherspoons. So I'm just wondering, are we guaranteed this building is going to take place and do it? The other thing I've got to raise is why the council didn't take this on with the grants available. We've already gave the Clyde Valley £400,000. We're giving them the site for £1, a prime site in Hamilton. When the council could have took it on, get the same grants, and they generate an income of about £250,000 a year for the rents. And I'd just like to ask the officers, is there a guarantee that this is going to go ahead? Because we're still waiting in the Bears building, 18 months down the line.
Right. I'll get your question answered, Alan. Thanks very much. Michael.
Yep, Chair. If I could deal with the first points, and perhaps if Danny can deal with the housing aspects, if that's okay.
Yep.
So we're aware of your previous issues and discussions over the Beards building, and it was sold, and that was a committee decision. However, I think, to be fair, I don't think anybody's envisaged that 12, 13 months ago that we'd be going through COVID. And like most capital projects, people, and similar to the council, have delayed them. However, officers have contacted Wetherspoons, and given that they own the building, and when you own a building, you then have to get a return from it. So my understanding from speaking to officers is that Wetherspoons, depending on restrictions being eased, will look to open up their existing public houses throughout the year, and then they will turn their attention to the Bears building in 2022. That's our best understanding at this point in time. Going back to Councillor Faulkner's point, can we guarantee that this will happen? I can't guarantee this will happen, but the function and role of the council in terms of an economic development service is to put in place the conditions to make development happen. And I think that's exactly what we've done here through the support of the town centre funding, through hopefully the support of the transfer of this land, and we're bringing in a development within the town centre. So that's the best that we can do. If we don't take these decisions and put those conditions in place, development won't happen on this site, and that's the view that we express in this report. So with that, Chair, if it's okay, I'll pass to Danny to deal with the second part.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Faulkner will be aware then, through the Housing and Technical Resources Committee and the HRA Capital Programme that was agreed last month, we've got a number of projects that are planned for the year ahead in terms of our new council housing commitments. In fact, there's 504 completions due across the period of the year, across the whole of South Lanarkshire, not just Hamilton. So there is a part that there's projects that have been carried out in the past in the Hamilton area, and again this year we've got more completions which are due in Heiston Hall Road in Hamilton, and we will continue to look at all of the opportunities across the whole of South Lanarkshire Council in terms of our new build programme going forward, and we will continue to work with our other partner organisations and other RSLs to make sure that we manage to maximise the number of completions of new properties across the area. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. Are there any other questions from
Chair,
colleagues?
could I come back in a couple of points there?
Yes, Alan, if you keep it short.
Right, on Michael's point there about Wetherspoons, and major projects stopping. Actually, 200 yards for Bears building. The Premier Inn continued to build through the COVID, by the way, the Premier Inn Hotel. Right. The other fact is Wetherspoons are in the social recreation drinks game, right? I would have thought because their pubs are shut, when the COVID's over and the pubs are reopened, they'd be thinking to themselves, we'll have a brand new spanking pub in Hamilton, so we should be working on it anew, but that's a business decision for them. I get back to the second point, the site. It says in 2.2.212, the best interests of the council, the legal agreements and terms which are the best. This is known the best interest of the council when we're getting a possible £250,000 a yearly income away to a tenants association who agree they do a great job, social landlords, we could have done it as well. So that's just, I'd like to make my point, by the way.
Right.
Thank you.
Alan. Right, thanks. If there's no more questions, I'll move the recommendation.
I'll second, Chair.
Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Fine, we move on to representation on outside bodies. This is Carluke Development Trust, and it's on 113 to 114. And Geraldine, if you could update us on this, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. This is a proposal put forward by the business manager of the Conservative Group to replace Councillor Corbett on the Carluke Development Trust, and it is suggested that she be replaced with Councillor Logan. So we're seeking approval for that, Chair.
Fine. If there's no comments on that, I'll move recommendation.
I'll second, Chair.
Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Move on to item 14, which is an item for noting, and it's the South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture Business Plan 21 to 22, pages 115 to 118, and Michael to update us on this, please.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and just conscious of time, so I'll keep this very brief. The funding agreement between the Council and the Trust requires them to submit a business plan to the Council. They have produced that business plan, and that was presented to their board on the 17th of February, and that it was approved at that meeting of their board. It's been submitted to myself and also Paul for review. At 3.5, we do recognise that in preparing the business plan, the Trust is faced with a number of issues, two principal issues. The first one is ongoing work of the cross-party working group, which is still to conclude. So they're still waiting for the strategic direction to be set. And then the second one is an obvious one, is at the ongoing and anticipated level of restrictions, which will affect the timing and nature of service resumptions, and that is uncertain, albeit there was some indications this week, but it is uncertain how they will actually start their services again. Notwithstanding all of that, it's still important for the Trust to produce a business plan for its stakeholders and its funding partners, including the Council, so that we are aware that the Trust is planning as best it can in the circumstances. In effect, Chair, this business plan is essentially a holding statement whilst we get a clarity through the cross-party working group and also see how the COVID restrictions are eased throughout the year. And it is proposed that where appropriate that the business plan is reviewed. So as I mentioned, myself and Paul have had the business plan submitted to us. We've reviewed that, and it is consistent, as it is at this moment in time, with the strategic policies of the Council. In terms of the progress of the business plan in the previous year, again, just recognising that services were essentially closed down the 18th of March. They were stood up and then stood back down. So there's been little progress in that. But I have to say, and then specifically included paragraph 4.2, just to highlight the work, the flexibility and the redeployment of Trust staff to support Council's reaction to COVID. Also, more recently, in the support for the vaccination programme and also the testing rollout as well. So I think it's just important to recognise the Trust's contribution to the overall reaction to and support for dealing with COVID. So with that, Chair, just go back to recommendations and just ask the committee to note the report. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. Yeah, the contribution to a number of different community aspects has been really appreciated from the staff at SLLC. This is an item for noting, and unless anyone is otherwise minded, I'm going to move we accept the recommendation.
Thanks, Chair. I'll second.
Right, thanks very much. Listen, I'm sorry the meeting's taken so long today. It was a large agenda. I would presume there's no other urgent business, and I would ask that we don't start the full council meeting to 1 o'clock. That would give everyone at least quarter of an hour for a comfort break. Okay.
Agreed.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
Right, bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thanks, Chair.